Hey guys, tonight we're doing something different. You're a Marine. It's November 1950, and you're about to walk into one of the most brutal battles in American military history. Your boots are frozen, your rifle feels like ice in your hands, and breakfast is a can of beans that might crack your teeth. Welcome to the Chosin Reservoir. So yeah, you probably won't survive this either. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to chase you with a bayonet over it. And hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this down in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake during these quiet hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, and let's step into the frozen hell of North Korea together. You wake up in a military tent somewhere in North Korea. The canvas walls shudder with every gust of wind, and your breath hangs in the air like tiny ghosts. The temperature outside is minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but it feels colder. Much colder. The Siberian wind cuts through everything, your uniform, your skin straight down to your bones. Your pillow is a helmet. Your blanket is a sleeping bag designed for autumn, not this Arctic nightmare. And the guy next to you? He's not snoring. He's shivering so hard the whole tent sounds like it's vibrating. You sit up and every joint in your body protests. Your feet are numb. You wiggle your toes inside your boots, praying you still have all 10. Frostbite is the invisible enemy here. Creeping in while you sleep, stealing fingers and toes without a sound. You've heard the stories. Marines waking up to find their feet black and useless. Surgeons with saws instead of scalpels. You push the thought away and lace up your boots tighter, as if that'll help. Outside, the world is a frozen wasteland. Snow stretches in every direction, broken only by the dark silhouettes of mountains and the scattered shapes of military vehicles. The Chosin Reservoir sits somewhere to the north, a massive body of water now locked under ice. Your unit, part of the 1st Marine Division, has been pushing north for weeks, chasing the remnants of the North Korean army. General MacArthur promised this would be over by Christmas. You'd be home by New Year's sipping hot cocoa, telling war stories. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. The air smells sharp like metal and pine resin mixed with the faint stench of diesel fuel. You breathe in and your lungs sting. It's the kind of cold that makes you wonder if your body will just give up. If your heart will decide it's too much effort to keep pumping frozen blood. But you're a Marine. You don't get to quit. You get to freeze, fight, and maybe die. In that order. A sergeant shouts your name. You stumble over, boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. He hands you a canteen. The water inside is half frozen, slushy like a gas station drink from hell. You take a sip, and it tastes like regret and bad. It's decisions. The sergeant grins, his face red and chapped. Get used to it, Marine. This is the good part. You don't ask what the bad part is. You already know. What you don't realize yet is that the Chinese are coming. Not a few stragglers, not a ragtag militia, an entire army, tens of thousands of soldiers, hidden in the mountains waiting. While you're shivering in your tent, worrying about frostbite, they're moving into position, surrounding you, preparing to attack. But that's a story for later. Right now, you're just trying to stay warm enough to make it to breakfast. You look around at your fellow Marines. Some are heating rations over tiny fires. Others are cleaning their rifles, fingers clumsy in the cold. A few are just staring into the distance, eyes hollow, minds somewhere far away. Maybe thinking about home, maybe thinking about nothing at all. You wonder how many of them will still be here in a week, how many will make it out alive. And then you wonder if you'll be one of them. The sky above is pale grey, the kind of grey that promises more snow, lots more snow. The mountains loom like silent judges, watching, waiting. Somewhere in those mountains, the enemy is watching too. You can feel it, a prickle on the back of your neck, a whisper in the wind. Something bad is coming, something worse than the cold and meter. But for now, all you can do is lace up your boots, grab your rifle and wait. You've been marching for days, maybe weeks. Time blurs when every step feels the same. Every breath burns the same. Every moment is just another fight against the cold. Your unit is part of the push north, heading toward the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. MacArthur's grand plan, reach the border, declare victory, go home, simple, clean, except nothing in war is ever simple, and this definitely isn't clean. The road is narrow, winding through mountains and valleys flanked by cliffs and forests. It's the only route big enough for trucks and tanks, which means it's also the only route for everyone else. Vehicles jam the road, nose to tail, engines running constantly, because if they stop, they might not start again. The exhaust mixes with the cold air, creating a fog that stings your eyes and coats your lungs. You cough, spit, keep walking. Your feet are your worst enemy now. Every Marine knows the saying, take care of your feet and they'll take care of you. But out here in this cold, that's easier said than done. Your socks are damp from sweat and snow, your boots are stiff, frozen solid in places. You've tried everything, extra layers, rubbing your feet, even sleeping with your boots on to keep them warm. Nothing works. Frostbite is patient. It waits, you pass through a small village, or what used to be a village. Now it's just rubble and empty buildings, roofs collapsed under snow, walls blackened by fire. No people, no animals, just silence. The war has already been here, tutored it up, spit it out, moved on. You wonder where the villagers went. South? Dead? Hiding in the mountains? You don't wonder for long. There's no time for that. A fact you didn't ask for. The 1st Marine Division was advancing toward the Chosin Reservoir as part of X-Corps, commanded by the Major General Edward Almond. Almond was a complicated figure, a decorated officer with a reputation for pushing his men hard. Too hard, some would say. He believed in aggressive tactics, impressing the attack no matter the cost. He also had a habit of dismissing intelligence reports that didn't fit his plans, like the ones warning about Chinese forces in the area. Here's where it gets weird. On November 23rd, 1950, just days before the battle would begin, Almond and other senior officers actually stood on the banks of the Yalu River, looking across into Manchuria. They posed for photos, smiling confident. The war was over, or so they thought. What they didn't know was that across that river, hidden in the mountains, over 20,000 Chinese soldiers were already moving south. The trap was closing, and they were walking right into it. But you don't know any of this. You're just a Marine, following orders, marching north. Your sergeant tells you to keep your eyes open, stay alert. Chinese laundrymen, Almond had called them, nothing to worry about. You're not sure if that's supposed to be reassuring or just stupid. Probably both. The landscape around you is beautiful in a brutal way. Snow-covered peaks, frozen rivers, forests of pine and fir. It's the kind of scenery you'd see on a postcard if postcards came from hell. But there's no time to admire it. You're too busy trying not to freeze, trying not to slip, trying not to think about what happens if the Chinese really are out there. At night you dig into the snow, trying to create some kind of shelter. You huddle with other Marines, sharing body heat, passing around a canteen of something that might be coffee but tastes more like motor oil. The wind howls, a constant, maddening sound that never stops. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but the cold won't let you. It presses in from all sides, relentless, suffocating. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice starts singing, quietly at first, then louder. It's a hymn, or maybe a Christmas carol. Others join in, their voices rough and off-key, but somehow it helps. For a few minutes, the cold doesn't feel quite so bad. The fear doesn't feel quite so heavy. You're not alone. You're a Marine surrounded by other Marines, and together you'll make it through this. At least that's what you tell yourself. But deep down, in a place you don't like to acknowledge, you know the truth. The worst is still coming. The march is just the beginning. Soon, very soon, the mountains will come alive with gunfire and screams, the snow will turn red, and you'll find out just how much a human being can endure before breaking. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you just need to survive the cold. November 27th, 1950. The night. Everything changes. You're dug in near a place called Udam-ni, a small village on the western edge of the Chosin Reservoir. Your unit has orders to push west the next morning to cut off enemy supply lines and link up with the 8th Army. It's a good plan, on paper. But paper doesn't account for 60,000 Chinese soldiers hiding in the mountains, waiting for the perfect moment to attack. The temperature has dropped even further, minus 30 degrees now, with wind chills pushing it down to minus 50. Your rifle is so cold it burns to touch. You've wrapped it in cloth trying to keep it warm enough to fire. Tank engines are running non-stop because if they stop, the tracks will freeze to the ground. Medics are warming plasma and blood supplies by holding them against their bodies. Everything is a fight against the cold. Night falls fast in the mountains. By 2200 hours, it's pitch black. The kind of darkness that feels alive. You're on watch, scanning the ridges, seeing nothing but shadows. Then you hear it. A sound that doesn't belong. Bugles, whistles, rattles. A cacophony of noise echoing through the valley, bouncing off the mountains, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then they come. Chinese soldiers, wave after wave, pouring down from the hills like a flood. They're wearing quilted uniforms, thin and inadequate for the cold, but they don't seem to care. They blow whistles, bang drums, shout in a language you don't understand. It's chaos. Pure, terrifying chaos. Your training kicks in. You raise your rifle, aim, fire. The muzzle flash blinds you for a second, but you keep firing. Around you, other Marines are doing the same. Tracer rounds streak through the darkness. Explosions light up the night. The Chinese tactics are simple but effective. They attack in overwhelming numbers, using the darkness and terrain to their advantage. They know these mountains. You don't. They've been planning this for weeks. You just got here. The first wave hits your position hard, and for a moment it feels like the line might break. But Marines don't break. Not easily. A grenade lands near you. You throw yourself flat and the explosion rocks the ground. Dirt and snow rain down on you. Your ears are ringing, your head spinning, but you're alive. You scramble back to your position, grab your rifle, keep firing. A Chinese soldier rushes toward you, bayonet fixed. You pull the trigger. He drops. You don't have time to think about it. Another one is already coming. Here's a brutal fact. During the first night of the Chinese attack, entire American and South Korean units were overrun. The 2nd Infantry Division, fighting further west along the Chongchon River, was hit so hard they were driven back in chaos, abandoning equipment and suffering massive casualties. The ROK-2 Corps, positioned on the right flank, collapsed completely, leaving an 80-mile gap in the UN lines. It was a disaster. But the Marines at Chosin held, barely. By dawn on Babensi, November 28th, your position is littered with bodies, Chinese and American. The snow is stained red. The smell of gunpowder and blood hangs heavy in the air. You're exhausted, your hands shaking, your mind numb, but you're still alive. For now, an officer appears, shouting orders. You need to consolidate, dig in deeper, prepare for the next attack, because there will be a next attack, and another, and another. The Chinese aren't going to stop. They have the numbers, the terrain, and the element of surprise. All you have is your rifle, your fellow Marines, and a stubborn refusal to die. You look around at the other Marines. Their faces are blackened with soot, eyes wide with shock. Some are wounded, bandaged hastily with whatever was available. Others are checking their weapons, reloading, getting ready. No one is talking. There's nothing to say. You all know what's coming. More cold and more fighting. As the sun rises, you see the full scope of the battlefield. The hills are covered with Chinese bodies, frozen in twisted positions. Your own casualties are being dragged to the aid station, a makeshift tent where medics work frantically to save lives. You hear screams, prayers, the sound of saws cutting through bone. You turn away. You can't think about that now. You have to focus on staying alive. And then you hear the rumour. The Marines are surrounded, cut off. The Chinese have blocked the roads, blown the bridges, taken the high ground. There's no easy way out. Some are calling it a trap, others are calling it a massacre in the making. But your commanding officer, Major General Oliver P. Smith, has a different word for it. He calls it an opportunity. Retreat hell, he'll later say. We're just attacking in a new direction. But that's still days away. Right now, all you know is that the battle has just begun. The frozen hell of Chosin is opening its jaws, and you're standing right in the middle. You're standing in Udamni, the westernmost point of the Marine advance, and the sun is rising on November 28th, 1950. Around you, the battlefield looks like something out of a nightmare. Bodies everywhere, frozen in grotesque positions, some Chinese, some American, all dead. The snow is no longer white. It's stained red and brown, churned up by boots and blood and the desperate scramble of men fighting for their lives. The air smells like cordite and copper, that metallic tang of blood that you can taste in the back of your throat. Your unit is trying to regroup. Officers are shouting orders, trying to establish a defensive perimeter. Marines are digging foxholes in the frozen ground, which is about as fun as it sounds. The earth is hard as concrete, and every strike of your entrenching tool sends painful vibrations up your arms. You dig anyway, because the alternative is dying above ground. Survival trumps comfort every single time. What you don't know yet is that you're completely surrounded. While you were fighting off the initial Chinese attack, other enemy units were moving into position behind you, cutting off the roads, blocking the mountain passes, taking the high ground. It's a classic encirclement, the kind of manoeuvre that military historians will study for decades, except you're not reading about it in a textbook. You're living it, and it's terrifying. Major General Oliver P. Smith, commanding the 1st Marine Division, is back at Hagaru-ri, about 14 miles south of your position. He's getting reports from all over the reservoir area, and none of them are good. The 5th and 7th Marine Regiments at Udamni are surrounded. Task Force Faith, east of the reservoir, is under heavy attack and taking massive casualties. The road between Udamni and Hagaru-ri has been cut by Chinese forces who've taken the high ground at Toktong Pass. It's a disaster unfolding in slow motion. Here's a fact that'll make you appreciate Smith even more. While other commanders were panicking and ordering immediate retreats, Smith remained calm. He'd been sceptical of the entire offensive from the start, suspecting that MacArthur and Almond were leading the division into a trap. So he'd deliberately moved slowly, establishing supply depots and defensive positions along the route. That caution, which Almond criticised timidity, is about to save your life. But Smith can't save you if you freeze to death first. The temperature has dropped to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills pushing it down to minus 60. At these temperatures, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your M1 Garand rifle is so cold that touching the metal with bare skin will leave you stuck to it, your flesh literally bonding with the frozen steel. You've learned to keep your gloves on at all times, even when firing, which makes everything harder but beats losing fingers. Your canteen is frozen solid, a useless lump of ice hanging from your belt. Some Marines are trying to thaw their water by keeping canteens inside their jackets, close to their bodies. It sort of works, except now you've got ice-cold metal pressed against your ribs, sucking away precious body heat. It's a lose-lose situation. Welcome to Chosin, where every solution creates a new problem. The medical situation is deteriorating fast. The aid station is overwhelmed with casualties, both from the fighting and from the cold. Men with frostbite are stacking up faster than the medics can treat them. Some have faces blackened by frostbite, looking like they've been burned. Others have feet that have swollen to twice their normal size, the skin splitting open. The medics are doing what they can, but there's not much you can do for frostbite in the field except keep the affected areas from refreezing, which is impossible when it's minus 35 degrees outside. Plasma bottles are freezing, rendering them useless. Medics are trying to keep them warm by carrying them inside their jackets, but it's not enough. Blood for transfusions is freezing too. Morphine syrettes are freezing, the morphine turning into a useless paste that won't inject. Even when it does work, the cold slows down the absorption, meaning wounded men suffer longer before the painkiller takes effect. It's medical care from the Dark Ages, except with more machine guns. You hear a rumour that makes your blood run even colder, if that's possible. Task Force McLean, later renamed Task Force Faith, positioned east of the reservoir, has been practically destroyed. Over 1,000 men killed, wounded or missing. The survivors are trying to fight their way south, but they're being hit from all sides. It's a massacre. You wonder if that's what's going to happen to your unit. You push the thought away, but it keeps coming back. An officer gathers your platoon for a briefing. The situation is simple. You're surrounded, outnumbered roughly 4-1, cut off from your supply lines, and facing an enemy that seems willing to throw endless waves of soldiers at you until you break. The good news, you're Marines. The bad news? That might not be enough this time. The officer's face is grim, but his voice is steady. We're going to hold this position until we get orders to move. Dig in, conserve ammunition, and stay alert. The Chinese will attack again tonight. Be ready. You go back to your foxhole and keep digging. The sound of entrenching tools biting into frozen earth echoes across the valley, a rhythmic clanking that sounds almost peaceful. Almost. Except you know what's coming. When the sun sets and darkness falls, the bugles will blow, the whistles will shriek, and the Chinese will come pouring down from the mountains again. And you'll have to kill them, or they'll kill you. It's that simple. Around you, other Marines are preparing. Some are cleaning their weapons, trying to keep the mechanisms from freezing. Others are arranging grenades within easy reach, making sure they can grab them quickly in the dark. A few are writing letters home, just in case. You don't write a letter. You don't know what you'd say. Dear Mum, I'm surrounded by 60,000 Chinese soldiers in minus 35-degree weather and I'll probably be dead by morning. Yeah, that'd go over well. The sun is setting now, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of orange and pink. It would be beautiful if it didn't mean that night is coming, and with it, another round of hell. You check your rifle one more time, make sure you have full magazines ready, and settle into your foxhole. The waiting is almost worse than the fighting. At least when you're fighting, you're too busy to think about dying. Somewhere in the distance you hear the first bugle call, your stomach clenches. Here we go again, the night is about to get very, very long. While you're fighting for your life at Udumni, about 7 miles south, something extraordinary is happening at a place called Tokhtong Pass. A single company of Marines, Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, is holding a critical position on the road. Between Udamni and Hagaru-ri, they're about 240 men, and they're about to face an entire Chinese regiment. The odds? Roughly 10 to 1. The temperature? Still minus 35 degrees. The outcome? About to become the stuff of legend. Captain William Barber commands Fox Company. He's 30 years old, a World War II veteran, and the kind of officer who leads from the front. When he was given orders to hold Tokhtong Pass, he understood immediately how critical the position was. If the Chinese take the pass, they cut the road completely, trapping the Marines at Udumni with no way to retreat. So Barber digs in his men on a small hill overlooking the pass, establishes a defensive perimeter, and waits for the enemy to come. He doesn't have to wait long. The first attack comes on the night of November 27th, the same night the Chinese hit Udumni. Bugles blow, whistles shriek, and Chinese soldiers come charging up the hill through knee-deep snow. Fox Company opens fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like a deadly light show. The Chinese come in waves, relentless, seemingly unconcerned about casualties. Men fall, but more keep coming. It's like trying to hold back the ocean with your bare hands. The fighting is brutal and close range. Chinese soldiers reach the Marine positions, and it turns into a hand-to-hand brawl. Bayonets, rifle butts, knives, anything that can kill. Men grapple in the snow, struggling for survival. The Marines hold, but barely. When dawn breaks, the ground around Fox Company's position is carpeted with Chinese bodies. But the Marines have taken casualties too. About 20 dead, 54 wounded. Out of 240 men, that's a significant chunk. Captain Barber is one of the wounded. A Chinese grenade exploded near him, sending shrapnel into his leg. The injury is serious enough that he can't walk, but Barber refuses to be evacuated. He has himself propped up where he can observe the entire perimeter, and he continues to command from there. When someone suggests he should go to the aid station, he tells them to shut up and get back to their positions. You don't abandon your men, not when they need you most. Here's a quirky detail that shows just how insane the situation is. Fox Company's medic, Navy Corpsman William McLaughlin, is treating wounded men while literally freezing to death himself. He's given his gloves to a wounded Marine, and his hands are becoming frostbitten as he works. But he keeps treating casualties, bandaging wounds with hands that are turning black, until someone finally forces him to stop. He'll lose several fingers to frostbite, but he saves dozens of lives. That's the kind of sacrifice happening all over Chosin. The Chinese attack again the next night, November 28th, and the night after that, and the night after that. Every night for 5 nights, Fox Company fights off Chinese assaults. The company gets smaller with each attack. 240 men becomes 220, then 200, then 180. The perimeter shrinks as there aren't enough men to hold the original positions, but they hold the pass, because if they don't, everyone at Udumni dies. The cold is as much an enemy as the Chinese. Men in fighting positions can't move around to generate body heat, so they freeze in place. Some Marines develop frostbite so severe their feet turn black and smell like rotten meat. Others have faces that are partially frozen, skin cracking and bleeding. One Marine's hands freeze to his rifle, and when he finally lets go he leaves skin behind on the metal. The medics are running out of supplies, out of morphine, out of pure plasma. But they keep working. Food is scarce. The company's supplies were meant to last a few days, but the siege goes on for nearly a week. Men are on quarter rations, then eighth rations. Some are eating snow to fill their stomachs, which only makes them colder. A few lucky ones have chocolate bars or candy that they share around. It's not much, but it's something. Hunger gnaws at everyone, a constant ache that never goes away. Despite everything, morale somehow holds. Maybe it's because of Barber, still commanding from his stretcher, refusing to show weakness even though he's in agony. Maybe it's because the Marines know how important their position is. Maybe it's just stubborn pride, the refusal to let the enemy win. Whatever the reason, Fox Company doesn't break. They bend, they bleed, they suffer. But they don't break. On December 2nd, relief finally arrives. Marines from Udom-ni, fighting their way south, link up with Fox Company at Tokdong Pass. When they see what Fox Company has been through, the condition of the men, the piles of Chinese dead surrounding the position, they're stunned. Out of 240 men who started the battle, only 82 are still able to fight. The rest are dead, wounded, or too badly frostbitten to continue. But they held the pass, they kept the road open, and because of that, 8,000 Marines at Udom-ni are able to escape the trap. Captain Barber will receive the Medal of Honor for his actions at Tokdong Pass, so will several other members of Fox Company. But the real medal, the one that matters to the Marines themselves, is survival. They fought impossible odds in impossible conditions, and they won. Not because they were superhuman, but because they refused to quit. That's the story of Fox Company at Chosin, and it's a story that will be told as long as the Marine Corps exists. But you don't know any of this yet. You're still at Udom-ni, still surrounded, still fighting, and you're about to face the hardest part of the battle, the breakout. December 1st, 1950. You receive the orders you've been waiting for and dreading. You're breaking out. Not retreating, breaking out. There's a difference, according to your officers. A retreat is when you run away. A breakout is when you fight your way through the enemy to link up with friendly forces. It's a semantic distinction that means absolutely nothing when people are shooting at you. But Marines are big on this. Semantics. The plan is straightforward in concept, brutal in execution. The 5th and 7th Marine Regiments at Udom-ni will attack south along the road toward Hagaru-ri, 14 miles away. They'll have to fight through multiple Chinese positions, cross Tokdong Pass where Fox Company is still holding on, and do all of it while carrying their wounded and dead. Because Marines don't leave men behind. Ever. It's not negotiable. You start moving out on the morning of December 1st. The column is massive. Thousands of Marines, hundreds of vehicles, dozens of tanks. The convoy stretches for miles, a slow-moving target for the Chinese soldiers occupying the high ground on both sides of the road. You're on foot, trudging through snow that is knee-deep in places, carrying a rifle, ammunition, grenades, and whatever personal gear you couldn't bear to leave behind, which isn't much. You ditched your sleeping bag to make room for more ammunition. Sleep is a luxury. Bullets are survival. The Chinese aren't just going to let you walk out. They attack the column constantly, hitting the flanks, trying to cut the convoy into segments that can be isolated and destroyed. Marines on the ridges flanking the road are in constant firefights, clearing Chinese positions one by one. It's slow, exhausting work. Every ridge has to be taken, every position has to be cleared. And once you've taken a ridge, you move on, and the Chinese often reoccupy it behind you. Progress is measured in yards, not miles. The sound is overwhelming. Rifle fire, machine guns, mortars, artillery, all blending into a continuous roar that never stops. Your ears are ringing constantly to the point where you can barely hear orders being shouted right next to you. Everything is muffled, distant, like you're underwater. You communicate mostly through hand signals, and by watching what everyone else is doing. If they're shooting, you shoot. If they're moving, you move. It's instinct now, not thought. You pass dead Marines frozen by the side of the road, their bodies too stiff to load onto the trucks. Someone has laid them out respectfully, weapons placed on their chests, faces covered. You don't look at them for long. Can't afford to. If you start thinking about death, you'll freeze up, and freezing up gets you killed. So you keep moving, one foot in front of the other, and you don't look at the bodies. The wounded are another story. You can't ignore them because they're screaming. Men with shattered legs, torn open chests, faces half blown away, all crying out for medics, for morphine, for their mothers. The corpsmen are doing what they can, but there are too many casualties and not enough medics. Some wounded men are loaded onto trucks and jeeps. Others have to walk if they can, supported by their buddies. A few who can't walk and can't fit on the vehicles are carried on stretchers, 4 Marines to a stretcher, taking turns because it's exhausting work. Here's a brutal historical fact. During the breakout, from Udamni to Hagaru-ri, the temperature dropped so low that plasma being used for transfusions would freeze before it could be administered. Corpsmen tried keeping the bottles inside their jackets, against their bodies, but even that wasn't always enough. Some wounded Marines died not from their injuries, but from the cold. They froze to death while waiting for treatment. Think about that. You survive getting shot, but you freeze to death before the medic can save you. That's Chosin. Marine Corsair pilots are doing everything they can to support the column, flying missions in weather that would normally ground all aircraft. They're dropping napalm on Chinese positions, strafing enemy troops, dropping supplies when the column needs ammunition or medical supplies. The pilots are heroes flying through ice and fog and enemy anti-aircraft fire. But they can't be everywhere at once. Most of the fighting is up to you, the Marine on the ground, with your rifle and whatever grenades you have left. On December 2nd, you reach Toktung Pass and link up with Fox Company. When you see them, what's left of them, you're shocked. They look like zombies, faces blackened with frostbite, moving like old men, eyes sunken and hollow. But they're still fighting, still holding their weapons, still Marines. They join the column, and you keep moving south. That night you're still on the road, still moving. The Chinese attack after dark as always, but this time you're ready. The column has established defensive positions, machine guns covering the approaches, mortars ready to fire. When the Chinese come, you pour fire into them, cutting them down in waves. They keep coming anyway, climbing over their own dead to get at you. It's insanity, but it's also desperation. They know if you escape, they've failed, so they throw everything at you. By December 3rd, you reach Hagaru-ri. You've made it. 14 miles in 3 days, fighting every step of the way. The column has taken heavy casualties, but you're alive. The perimeter at Hagaru-ri is holding, reinforced by Marines who've been building defences for days. There's hot food which you can barely taste because your mouth is so numb. There are tents with stoves, blessed warmth that makes you want to cry. There are medics with supplies, treating the wounded properly for the first time in days. But you're not safe yet. Hagaru-ri is still surrounded. The Chinese are still attacking, and you still have 38 miles to go to reach the coast at Hungnam, where the Navy is waiting to evacuate you. The battle isn't over, it's just entering a new phase, but for tonight, you're warm, you're fed, and you're alive. That's enough. You'll worry about tomorrow when tomorrow comes. December 3rd and 50. You made it to Hagaru-ri, and for the first time in days, you feel something that vaguely resembles safety. Not actual safety, mind you. You're still surrounded by Chinese forces that outnumber you 4-1. The temperature is still hovering, around minus 30 degrees, and you're still 38 miles from the coast. But hey, there's hot food, warming tents, and actual medical facilities. It's like checking into a 5-star hotel, if 5-star hotels were surrounded by enemy soldiers trying to kill you. Hagaru-ri isn't much to look at. It's a small village at the southern tip of the Chosin Reservoir, positioned where the road splits, one branch heading north to Udamni, the other northeast to the reservoir's eastern shore. Before the war, maybe a few hundred people lived here. Now it's the most important piece of real estate in North Korea, because whoever controls Hagaru-ri controls the only escape route south. Lose Hagaru-ri, and everyone at Chosin dies. It's that simple. The defensive perimeter is roughly circular, about 4 miles in circumference, and it's packed with Marines, soldiers, and support personnel. Inside the perimeter is the aid station, supply dumps, the partially completed airfield, and command headquarters. Outside the perimeter in every direction are Chinese soldiers waiting for their chance to overrun the position. It's like being in a snow globe, except instead of cheerful winter scenes, you've got machine gun fire and mortar explosions. Major General Oliver P. Smith is here, commanding from his headquarters. While you were fighting for your life at Udamni, Smith was directing the defence of Hagaru-ri, which has been under attack since November 28th. Chinese forces have tried repeatedly to break through the perimeter, and each time they've been thrown back, but the casualties are mounting. The 1st Marine Division has already lost over 1,000 men killed and wounded and thousands more are suffering from frostbite. Here's a fact that'll make you appreciate Smith even more. While General Almond was screaming about continuing the attack north, Smith was quietly building up Hagaru-ri as a strongpoint. He insisted on stockpiling supplies, establishing an aid station, and most importantly, building an airfield. Almond thought Smith was being overly cautious, even cowardly. Turns out Smith was saving thousands of lives. That airfield, still under construction when the Chinese attacked, is about to become the difference between survival and annihilation. You're assigned to a section of the perimeter on the eastern side, digging in with your platoon. The ground is frozen solid, making digging foxholes an exercise in futility and frustration. You chip away at the ice with your entrenching tool, making maybe an inch of progress every 10 minutes. Your hands are numb, your back aches, and you're wondering if hypothermia might actually be preferable to this. But you keep digging because the alternative is being fully exposed when the Chinese attack tonight. And they will attack tonight. They always do. The perimeter defense isn't just Marines. There are Army soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division, engineers who are building the airfield, service and support troops who've never fired a rifle in combat, and even a company of British Royal Marines. Everyone who can hold a weapon is on the line. There's no rear area here. If you're at Hagaru-ri, you're a rifleman, regardless of your actual job. The warming tents are a blessed relief. You get a rotation, 20 minutes in the tent to thaw out, then back to your position. The contrast between the minus 30-degree cold outside and the relative warmth inside the tent is so extreme it's almost painful. Your fingers and toes start burning as blood flow returns. Some men cry from the pain. Others just sit there, staring at nothing, trying to absorb as much warmth as possible before they have to go back out. Food is hot sea rations, which taste like heaven compared to the frozen cans you've been trying to eat for the past week. You shovel beans and mystery meat into your mouth, barely tasting it, just grateful for the warmth in your stomach. Coffee is available too, bitter and scalding hot, and you drink it black because there's no time for cream or sugar. Someone makes a joke that the coffee tastes like diesel fuel. Someone else responds that diesel fuel would probably taste better. Everyone laughs, because what else are you going to do? The aid station is overwhelmed. Rows of wounded men lie on stretchers waiting for treatment. Some have gunshot wounds, others have been hit by shrapnel. Many have severe frostbite, their feet and hands blackened and swollen. The corpsmen and doctors are working around the clock, performing surgery in unheated tents, trying to save as many lives as possible. The smell is overwhelming, a mix of blood, antiseptic, gangrene, and human waste. You try not to look too closely as you walk past, but you can't help but see the rows of bodies outside the tent, the ones who didn't make it. Here's a quirky detail that shows just how desperate the situation is. When the Marines ran out of plasma at the aid station, they started performing direct blood transfusions, taking blood from healthy Marines and giving it directly to wounded men. No blood typing, no time for proper screening, just find someone with the same rough blood type and hope for the best. It's medieval medicine with a modern twist, and somehow it works. Lives are saved because Marines are willing to literally give their blood for each other. That night, as darkness falls, you hear the familiar sounds. Bugles, whistles, the rattle of equipment. The Chinese are coming again, hitting the perimeter from multiple directions, probing for weak spots. You settle into your foxhole, rifle ready, and wait. The temperature is dropping even further and the wind is picking up, cutting through every layer of clothing like it's not even there. Your teeth are chattering oh hard, you bite your tongue and taste blood. The first attack hits the northern edge of the perimeter. You hear the gunfire, see the muzzle flashes in the distance. Watch as tracer rounds arc through the darkness. Your sector is quiet, for now, but that could change at any moment. You keep your eyes on the darkness in front of you, scanning for movement, listening for the sound of boots crunching in snow. Every shadow looks like an enemy soldier. Every sound is a potential threat. Your nerves are wound so tight you feel like you might snap, but the perimeter holds. The Marines and soldiers fight back with everything they have, pouring rifle and machine gun fire into the attacking Chinese forces. Artillery and mortars provide support, illumination rounds turning night into day for brief moments, revealing the enemy before they can close with your positions. The Chinese take heavy casualties but keep coming, climbing over their own dead to reach the perimeter. It's courage bordering on fanaticism, and it's terrifying to watch. By dawn, the attack has been repulsed. The ground outside the perimeter is carpeted with Chinese bodies. Your sector didn't see direct action, but you're exhausted anyway. Drained by the tension and the coal, you're alive for another day. That's something. December 4th in 50. Today you witness something that shouldn't be possible. You watch as C-47 transport planes land on a partially completed airstrip in the middle of a battle in -30-degree weather, surrounded by enemy forces. It's either the bravest or stupidest thing you've ever seen, and you're not sure which. Maybe both. The Hagaru-ri airstrip is only 29 feet long, barely long enough for the C-47s to land and take off. It's not even finished, the engineer's still working on it, even as the battle rages around them. The runway is compacted snow and ice, slippery and treacherous. There are no lights for night operations, no control tower, no ground crew beyond a handful of engineers with radios. It's the most primitive airfield imaginable, and it's about to save thousands of lives. The first plane comes in low, engines roaring, wings wobbling as the pilot fights the crosswinds. You hold your breath, watching as the wheels touch down, bounce once, poise, then grip the icy runway. The plane skids slightly but stays on the strip, finally coming to a stop near the far end. A cheer goes up from the Marines watching. Someone just pulled off the impossible. The plane's cargo door opens and supplies start coming out. Ammunition, medical supplies, food, cold weather gear. Everything the division desperately needs. But that's not the plane's real purpose. Its real purpose is what happens next. Wounded men are loaded on board, carried on stretchers by corpsmen, some walking with assistance, others unconscious or delirious from pain and morphine. The most seriously wounded go first, the ones who won't survive another night in the cold. Here's a brutal fact. During the evacuation from Hagaru-ri, over 400 casualties were flown out on C-47s over a period of 5 days. That's an average of 900 men per day, operating under combat conditions in weather that would normally ground all aircraft. The pilots flew missions that aviation experts said were impossible. They landed on ice, took it off overloaded, and flew through fog and snow that reduced visibility to almost zero. Some planes took small arms fire for Chinese positions near the airfield. All of them kept flying. You're assigned to help carry wounded to the planes. It's heartbreaking work. Men with terrible injuries, missing limbs, faces wrapped in bandages, calling out for morphine or their mothers, or just for someone to tell them they're going to be okay. You lie to them, telling them they'll be fine, that they'll be home soon, that the worst is over. You don't know if it's true. You just know they need to hear it. One Marine you carry to a plane is missing both feet to frostbite. He's conscious, lucid, and he keeps apologising. Apologising for being wounded, for being a burden, for not being able to fight anymore. You want to shake him and tell him he has nothing to apologise for, that he's a hero just for surviving this long. But you just tell him it's okay, that he's going home, that he did good. He nods and closes his eyes, tears freezing on his cheeks. Another man is delirious from a head wound, babbling about his wife, his kids, a farm in Kansas. He keeps asking if the harvest is done, if the cattle are fed, if his boy finished his homework. The corpsman with you just nods and agrees with everything, keeping the man calm as you load him onto the plane. You wonder if he'll make it, if he'll ever see that farm again. You try not to think about it. The planes don't stay on the ground long. As soon as they're loaded, they're taxiing back to the runway, engines roaring as they build speed for takeoff. Some planes are so overloaded they barely clear the mountains at the end of the runway. You watch them climb, willing them to gain altitude, praying they don't crash. Most make it, a few don't. You try not to think about that either. Between plane loads, you rest near the runway, trying to steal a few minutes of warmth. Other Marines are doing the same, huddled in groups, sharing cigarettes and stories. Someone mentions that back home, people are shopping for Christmas presents, putting up decorations, singing carols. It feels like a different planet, not just a different country. You can't imagine what normal life is like anymore. This frozen hell is all you know, a quirky detail that captures the surreal nature of the situation. One of the C-47 pilots, after landing, climbed out of his plane and casually asked if anyone had seen combat. When told yes by just about everyone present, he asked what it was like. The Marines stared at him in disbelief. The pilot had just landed on an active battlefield in impossible conditions, and he wanted to know what combat was like. Someone finally told him to get back in his plane and get the hell out before he found out personally. The pilot laughed, climbed back in, and took off with a load of wounded. The airfield operation continues day and night. During the day, the planes have to dodge occasional Chinese mortar fire. At night, they land using nothing but vehicle headlights positioned along the runway. It's insane, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. Without these flights, the wounded would die. It's that simple. By December 6th, when the division begins its final move south from Hagaru-ri, over 400-500 casualties have been evacuated. The dead, numbering in the hundreds, are loaded onto trucks to be carried out. Marines don't leave their dead behind. Ever. Even if it means carrying frozen corpses for 38 miles through enemy territory. You watch the last plane take off, climbing into the grey sky, and you feel a mixture of relief and envy. Relief that those men are escaping this frozen nightmare. Envy because you're still here, and the hardest part of the journey is still ahead. The breakout to Koto-ri, 11 miles south, then another 27 miles to Hungnam. Every mile contested by Chinese forces. Every step a battle. But for now, for this moment, you allow yourself a small measure of pride. You've held Hagaru-ri. You've evacuated the wounded. You've survived another day. That's more than many can say. December 6th, 1950. The order comes down. The division is moving out. Destination Koto-ri, 11 miles south. The plan is simple in concept, brutal in execution. The 7th Marines will lead, fighting their way down the road, clearing Chinese positions along the route. The 5th Marines will follow, protecting the massive convoy of vehicles, wounded, and supplies. The 1st Marines, who fought their way into Hagaru-ri from Koto-ri days earlier, will provide flank security and rear guard. It's a fighting retreat, or as Major General Smith prefers to call it, attacking in a different direction. You're with the 5th Marines, somewhere in the middle of the convoy. The column stretches for miles, thousands of men and hundreds of vehicles, all inching their way south along a single narrow road. To your left are steep hills, occupied by Chinese soldiers. To your right are more hills, also occupied by Chinese soldiers. In front of you and behind you are more Marines, more trucks, more men just trying to survive. It's a 11-mile-long target, and the Chinese have every intention of destroying it. The convoy moves slowly, agonizingly slowly. Every few hundred yards, the column stops because Chinese forces are attacking the lead elements. You can hear the gunfire echoing down the valley, sharp cracks of rifles and the heavier thud of machine guns. Sometimes you see smoke rising from the hills as artillery strikes Chinese positions. Sometimes you see explosions as Chinese mortars hit the road. Mostly you just wait, stamping your feet to keep the circulation going, rifle ready, eyes scanning the ridges for threats. Here's a fact that illustrates the scale of the operation. The convoy includes over 400 vehicles, 10,000 troops, and all the division's heavy equipment. Everything that can roll is on the road. Everything that can't is destroyed to keep it from falling into enemy hands. The division is taking everything with it, including its wounded and dead. It's the largest military movement under fire in American military history up to that point. The Chinese don't just attack from the hills, they set up roadblocks, forcing the convoy to stop while engineers and infantry clear them. They blow up sections of the road, creating craters that have to be filled before vehicles can pass. They target the convoy with sniper fire, picking off individuals, creating chaos and fear. It's death by 1,000 cuts, trying to bleed the division dry before it can reach safety. You pass burned-out vehicles by the side of the road, wrecks from earlier fighting. Some are American, some Chinese, all destroyed beyond recognition. Bodies lie scattered in the snow, frozen in the positions they died in. Chinese soldiers who got too close, American soldiers who didn't move fast enough. All equals now in death. You don't look too closely, can't afford to. Have to keep moving, the temperature is dropping again. It's now minus 35 degrees, with wind chills pushing it to minus 50. Your breath freezes instantly, creating a cloud of ice crystals around your face. Your eyelashes freeze together, and you have to blink hard to separate them. Your rifle is so cold that touching the metal with bare skin will tear flesh. Everything hurts, all the time, a constant ache that never goes away. Marine Corsair fighters are overhead when the weather permits, providing close air support. You watch as they dive on Chinese positions, dropping napalm and strafing with their machine guns. The napalm creates massive fireballs that roll up the hillsides, looking almost beautiful in the grey landscape. Almost. Until you remember that men are dying in those flames. Enemy men, yes, but still men. A quirky detail that shows the desperation and ingenuity of the Marines. When vehicle engines froze and wouldn't start, mechanics would build fires under the engine blocks to warm them enough to turn over. It was dangerous, inefficient, and sometimes resulted in vehicle fires, but it kept the convoy moving. In one case, a Marine wrapped his sleeping bag around a truck's engine overnight, sacrificing his own warmth to keep the engine from freezing. The truck started the next morning. The Marine had severe frostbite. He considered it a fair trade. That night, the convoy stops. You've made maybe 5 miles in 12 hours, another 6 miles to go tomorrow. You dig in for the night, establishing defensive positions, preparing for the inevitable Chinese attacks. They come around midnight, probing attacks designed to find weak points in your perimeter. You fight them off, firing into the darkness at shadows and sounds, burning through ammunition you can't afford to waste. By December 7th, you reach Koto-ri. The 11-mile journey took 38 hours of constant fighting. The casualties are heavy, but the division is intact. You've beaten the odds again, but you're not done. Koto-ri to Hungnam is another 27 miles, and the Chinese aren't giving up. The next challenge is Funchilin Pass, where the Chinese have destroyed a critical bridge. Without that bridge, the division can't get its vehicles out. And without the vehicles, you lose all your heavy equipment and supplies. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you're in Koto-ri, you're alive, and you're one step closer to the sea. You collapse in a warming tent, too exhausted to eat, too cold to sleep properly. You drift in and out of consciousness, dreaming of home, of warmth, of anything that isn't snow and death and cold. Tomorrow you'll face Funchilin Pass. Tomorrow you'll find out if the bridge can be rebuilt. Tomorrow you'll keep fighting. But tonight, just for a few hours, you rest. The Battle of Chosin isn't over, not by a long shot. But you're still here, you're still fighting. And that's enough. December 8th, 1950. You're standing in Koto-ri, looking south at the road that leads to freedom. And there's a problem. A big problem. The Chinese have blown up a bridge at a place called Funchilin Pass, a narrow gorge where the mountain road clings to a cliff face hundreds of feet above a frozen river. Without that bridge, the division is trapped. All your tanks, all your vehicles, all your wounded, everything that can't walk out on foot is stuck. And walking out isn't really an option when you're carrying 10,000 men, most of them wounded or frostbitten. The destroyed bridge is at a place the Marines will later call the Gateway to Hell. It's a single-lane span about 24 feet long, crossing a massive gap where the Chinese used explosives to drop the original structure into the abyss below. On both sides of the gap, the road is barely wide enough for a single vehicle. To the left is a sheer cliff face rising hundreds of feet. To the right is empty air and a drop that will kill you instantly. It's the ultimate choke point, and the Chinese know it. Major General Smith has a plan, though. It's audacious, possibly insane, but it's the only option. Engineers from the 1st Marine Division and Army units are going to build a new bridge. Not a permanent structure, just something strong enough to get the vehicles across. The problem is getting the bridge sections to Funchilin Pass. They're massive, heavy, and there's no way to transport them by ground because the road is blocked, so they're going to drop them from the sky. Here's a fact that sounds like it came from a movie. On December 7th, 8 bridge sections, each one weighing 2,500 pounds and measuring 24 feet long, were parachuted from C-119 flying boxcar transport planes directly to the site. The drop had to be incredibly precise, with the sections landing close enough to the road that engineers could retrieve them, but not so far away that they'd tumble down the mountain. 7 of the 8 sections landed intact. The 8th crashed and was unusable, but 7 was enough, just barely. You're not one of the engineers who has to actually build this bridge, thank God. That job falls to Lieutenant Colonel John Partridge and his combat engineers, who have to work under fire, in minus 30-degree weather, on the edge of a cliff with Chinese soldiers shooting at them from the surrounding hills. It's the kind of job that makes regular combat seem relaxing by comparison. You watch from a distance as they work, marvelling at their courage or possibly their stupidity, maybe both. The engineers work through December 8th and into December 9th, bolting the bridge sections into place, reinforcing them with timber, creating a platform strong enough to support 50-ton tanks. Chinese forces attack repeatedly, trying to stop the construction, but Marine infantry and artillery keep them at bay. Every few hours, mortars land near the worksite, sending engineers diving for cover. Then they get up, dust themselves off and keep working. It's either incredibly brave or completely insane. You're still not sure which. While the engineers work, you're preparing for the breakout. The division is going to move as soon as the bridge is complete, and that means everyone needs to be ready. You check your rifle for the 1000th time, make sure you have ammunition. Fill your canteen with water that will probably freeze within an hour. Around you, other Marines are doing the same, the pre-combat ritual that's become so familiar you could do it in your sleep. Which is good, because you're so exhausted you might actually be asleep and just not realise it. A quirky detail that shows just how desperate the situation has become. Some Marines are carrying frozen Chinese corpses on their vehicles as extra armour. The bodies, frozen solid, are stacked on the outside of trucks and jeeps, creating a macabre shield against bullets. It's horrifying, practical, and deeply disturbing all at once. War does strange things to people. The cold does stranger things. The temperature has dropped even further, hitting minus 40 degrees with wind chills approaching minus 60. At these temperatures, metal becomes brittle and breaks easily. Rubber cracks and shatters. Exposed flesh freezes in seconds. You're not really a human being anymore. You're just a meat popsicle with a rifle trying to stay functional, long enough to reach safety. Every breath hurts, every movement is agony, but you keep moving because the alternative is death. On December 9th, the bridge is complete. It's not pretty, it's not perfect, but it's there. A narrow span of metal and wood suspended over a 1/500-foot drop, held together by bolts, prayers, and the sheer determination of the engineers who built it. The division begins moving across immediately, vehicles inching forward one at a time, drivers staring straight ahead, refusing to look down at the abyss below. You're on foot, walking alongside the vehicles, rifle ready. Chinese soldiers are in the hills, firing down at the column. Bullets ping off vehicles, ricochet off rocks, sometimes find flesh. Men fall, are dragged aside, and the column keeps moving. There's no time to stop, no time to help. Either you keep moving or you die, it's that simple. The bridge holds. Tank after tank, truck after truck, jeep after jeep, all crossing that narrow span. Some vehicles slip on the ice, wheels spinning dangerously close to the edge. But drivers recover, keep moving, make it across. When you finally cross the bridge yourself, you make the mistake of looking down. The gorge below is so deep you can barely see the bottom. Ice and rocks and frozen death waiting for anyone who falls. You grip your rifle tighter and keep walking, one foot in front of the other, not breathing until you reach solid ground on the other side. You made it. The bridge held. It's a miracle wrapped in engineering delivered by parachute. Behind you, engineers are already preparing to destroy the bridge once the last vehicle crosses. Can't leave it intact for the Chinese. As the final rearguard units cross, explosives are set, and the bridge that saved the division is blown to pieces, tumbling into the gorge below. You don't watch. You're already moving south, down Funchilin Pass toward Chinhung-ni and the coastal plains beyond. The worst is almost over. Almost. December 9th at 10, 1950. You're descending Funchilin Pass, and every step feels like it might be your last. The road switchbacks down the mountainside in a series of tight curves, each one barely wide enough for a single vehicle. On one side is the mountain. On the other side is nothing but air and a drop that would turn a man into paste. The Chinese are on the high ground, firing down at the column, trying to create chaos and panic. It's working. The pass is roughly 10 miles long, dropping 2,500 feet in elevation. That sounds manageable until you factor in the ice, the narrow road, the Chinese attacks, and the thousands of Marines and soldiers trying to descend simultaneously. The column stretches for miles, a slow-moving target that the enemy hits repeatedly. Mortars land on the road, sending vehicles skidding toward the edge. Snipers pick off individuals. Roadblocks force the column to stop while engineers clear them under fire. You're walking near the middle of the column, exhausted beyond belief. Your feet are numb, probably frostbitten, though you try not to think about it. Your rifle weighs about 500 pounds, or at least it feels that way. Every step is an effort, every breath a struggle. Around you, other Marines look the same, faces blackened by frostbite and soot, eyes hollow, movements mechanical. You're all zombies now, shambling south, held together by pride and stubbornness. Here's a brutal fact about the descent. Many Marines who survived the fighting at Chosin lost toes, fingers or feet during the march down Funchal Pass. The combination of exhaustion, cold and constant movement meant men couldn't stop to warm up, couldn't change socks, couldn't do any of the things necessary to prevent frostbite. They just kept walking and their extremities froze. Some men didn't realise how bad the damage was until they reached Hungnam and took off their boots, only to find their feet had turned black. Marine Corsair fighters are overhead, providing close air support whenever visibility allows. You watch as they dive on Chinese positions, dropping napalm that creates massive fireballs rolling up the hillsides. The heat is so intense you can feel it from the road, a brief moment of warmth in the frozen hell. Then the flames die down, the warmth fades, and the cold rushes back in. For those few seconds, though, you remember what warmth feels like. The convoy is under constant attack. Chinese forces set up roadblocks using disabled vehicles, logs, rocks, anything to stop the column's movement. Each roadblock requires infantry to clear it, engineers to move debris, all while under fire from the surrounding hills. Progress is measured in yards per hour. This rate you calculate, it'll take days to reach Chinungni, only 10 miles away. You try not to think about that. A quirky detail that captures the surreal nature of the situation. At one point during the descent, a marine driver's truck went over the edge of the cliff. Everyone assumed he was dead, pulverized at the bottom of the gorge. 3 hours later, the marine walked back up to the road, bruised and battered, but alive. The truck had caught on a ledge about 30 feet down, and he'd climbed back up. When someone asked how he felt, he reportedly said, "Cold." That pretty much summed up everyone's condition. Night falls, and the column continues moving. There's no stopping in Funchal Pass. To stop is to die, either from Chinese attacks or from the cold. So you keep walking one foot in front of the other, guided by the dim taillights of vehicles ahead and the occasional flare lighting up the night. The darkness is complete, oppressive, broken only by muzzle flashes and explosions. You're in a nightmare and you can't wake up. Sometime around midnight on December 10th, you reach Chinungni at the base of the pass. The 3rd Infantry Division has established a defensive perimeter here, and for the first time in weeks, you're behind friendly lines that aren't surrounded. There are warming tents, hot food, medical aid stations with actual doctors and supplies. You stumble into a warming tent and collapse on the ground, too exhausted to eat, too cold to sleep. Someone throws a blanket over you. You might say thank you. You're not sure. Everything is distant, muffled, unreal. The 1st Marine Division has made it out of the mountains. Not everyone made it. The casualty list is staggering. Over 750 dead, over 3,000 wounded, and over 6,000 cases of severe frostbite. Entire companies have been reduced to platoon strength, but the division is intact, functional, and still carrying its weapons and wounded. You didn't retreat, you didn't break, you fought your way through 8 miles of Chinese-occupied territory in the worst winter conditions imaginable, and you survived. But you're not home yet. Chinhungni to Hungnam is another 28 miles. The road is open, relatively safe, but you still have to walk it. And the Chinese are still out there, still trying to destroy you. The battle isn't over. It's just entering its final phase. Tomorrow, you'll start walking again. Tonight, you rest, if you can remember how. December 24th, 1950. You reach Hungnam on December 11th, and for the first time in nearly a month, you see the ocean. The port is massive, protected by Navy ships, surrounded by a defensive perimeter manned by the 3rd Infantry Division. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Not because Hungnam is particularly attractive, it's mostly just industrial docks and warehouses, but because it represents escape, safety, survival, home. The evacuation operation is already underway. Navy transports are lined up at the docks, loading troops, vehicles, equipment, everything the division can carry. The plan is to evacuate over 100,000 military personnel, 17,500 vehicles, 350,000 tons of cargo, and as many Korean refugees as possible. It's the largest amphibious evacuation in American military history, and it has to happen fast. The Chinese are coming, pushing south, trying to reach Hungnam before the UN forces can escape. You're assigned to perimeter defense while the evacuation proceeds. It's not glamorous work, but after what you've been through, Standing in a defensive position and shooting at Chinese soldiers feels almost relaxing. At least you're not marching through mountains in minus 40-degree weather. At least there's hot food and warming tents. At least you can change your socks. Small victories. The perimeter is under constant attack. Chinese forces probe the defences every night, testing for weak spots, trying to break through to the port. They never make it. The 3rd Infantry Division, reinforced by Marines and with massive naval gunfire support from offshore, holds the line. Destroyers and cruisers fire their main guns at Chinese positions, dropping shells that create massive explosions inland. It's comforting in a strange way to have that kind of firepower supporting you. Here's a fact that shows the scale of the evacuation. Between December 11th and December 24th, Navy ships evacuated 105,000 military personnel and 98,000 Korean refugees. That's over 200,000 people loaded onto the ships and transported to safety in less than 2 weeks. It's a logistical miracle, accomplished under combat conditions, in winter weather, with the enemy literally at the gates. The Navy doesn't always get credit for its work in Korea, but at Hungnam, they saved tens of thousands of lives. The refugees are heartbreaking. Tens of thousands of North Korean civilians fleeing south ahead of the Chinese and North Korean forces have gathered at Hungnam hoping for evacuation. They are cold, hungry, terrified. Many have walked hundreds of miles, some are carrying children, elderly parents, whatever possessions they could grab. The Navy makes room for them on the ships, cramming them into cargo holds, onto decks, anywhere there's space. It's crowded, uncomfortable, but it's better than staying behind to face Chinese occupation. A quirky detail that captures the humanity in the midst of chaos. One ship, the SS Meredith Victory, a cargo vessel with accommodations for 12 passengers, loaded 14,000 refugees. That's not a typo. 14,000 people crammed onto a ship designed for a dozen passengers. They were packed so tightly there was barely room to sit. The voyage to safety took 3 days, during which 5 babies were born on board. All 14,005 passengers made it safely to Busan. The captain, Leonard LaRue, later said it was a miracle. No one disagreed. By December 20th, most of the division has been evacuated. You're still on the perimeter, part of the rear guard that will be the last to leave. The Chinese attacks are intensifying as they realise the UN forces are escaping. Every night is a battle, fire and smoke and the smell of cordite. But the perimeter holds. The Navy keeps firing. The transports keep loading. The evacuation continues. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, you're among the last Marines to board a transport ship. As you walk up the gangplank, you look back at Hungnam one last time. Behind you, engineers are setting demolitions, preparing to destroy the port facilities so the Chinese can't use them. Massive stockpiles of ammunition, fuel and supplies that couldn't be evacuated are rigged to explode. It's going to be one hell of a fireworks show. The ship pulls away from the dock, and minutes later Hungnam erupts. Explosions ripple across the port, massive fireballs rising hundreds of feet into the air. The concussions felt miles out to sea. It looks like the end of the world, a final exclamation point on the Chosin campaign. The Chinese can have Hungnam. All they'll find is rubble and ash. You stand on the deck, watching Korea recede in the distance, and you feel nothing. No relief, no joy, just emptiness. You're alive, which is more than many can say. Out of the 30,000 men who were at Chosin when the Chinese attacked, you're one of the survivors. You made it. But the cost was staggering, and the scars, both physical and mental, will last forever. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir is over. The 1st Marine Division fought its way through 78 miles of enemy territory in the worst winter conditions imaginable, and emerged intact. You didn't win, not in the traditional sense, but you didn't lose either. You survived. And sometimes, survival is the only victory that matters. The ship sails south, towards safety, toward warmth, toward home. You go below deck, find a corner, and finally for the first time in a month you sleep without fear of freezing or being shot. It's the best sleep you've had in your life. You're on a ship, sailing south from Hungnam, and for the first time in a month you're not freezing, not fighting, not waiting for the next Chinese attack. The ship's hold is warm, relatively speaking. There's hot food in the galley. There are medics with actual medical supplies, not just frozen plasma and prayers. You should feel relieved. You should feel grateful. Instead, you feel nothing, just a vast empty numbness that sits in your chest like a block of ice that refuses to melt. Around you, other Marines are sprawled on bunks, on the floor, wherever they can find space. Some are sleeping, finally able to rest without fear of dying in their sleep. Others are awake but silent, staring at nothing, lost in their own thoughts. A few are talking quietly, sharing cigarettes, comparing frostbite damage like it's some kind of competition. I lost 3 toes. Yeah? I lost 4.5 a foot. Nobody wins these contests. The ship is packed with casualties, not just from the 1st Marine Division, but from other units that fought at Chosin. Army soldiers from Task Force Faith, the ones who survived that nightmare east of the reservoir. British Royal Marines who fought at Hagaru-ri. South Korean troops who somehow made it through. Everyone has the same look, hollow-eyed, exhausted, damaged in ways that go deeper than frostbite and gunshot wounds. Here's the brutal truth about Chosin. The 1st Marine Division entered the battle with approximately 25,000 men. When it was over, the division had suffered 418 battle casualties, 718 dead, 192 missing, 358 wounded. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. Add in the frostbite cases, over 7% Marines who lost toes, fingers, feet, hands, and the total casualty figure climbs to over 11,000. That's nearly half the division, casualties in less than 2 weeks of fighting. Task Force Faith, the army unit east of the reservoir, had it worse. Out of approximately 2,500 men, fewer than 1,000 made it out. The rest were dead, missing, or captured. The survivors told stories that made even hardened Marines wince. Being overrun, vehicles burning, wounded left behind, because there was no way to carry them. It was a slaughter, and the men who lived through it would never be the same. The Chinese casualties were even more staggering. Intelligence estimates suggested that 9 Chinese divisions, over 60,000 men, were rendered combat ineffective by the battle. Some divisions lost 80 and 90% of their strength. The Chinese attacked in waves, throwing men at Marine positions with little regard for casualties, and the cold killed as many Chinese soldiers as American bullets did. Maybe more. Bodies littered the mountains around Chosin, frozen solid, many still in the positions they died in. You think about the men who didn't make it. The Marine in your platoon who took a bullet in the first Chinese attack and died before the corpsman could reach him. The driver whose truck went over the cliff at Funchal Pass. The kid from Iowa got separated during the fighting and was never seen again. Their faces blur together in your memory, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. You try to remember their names, but the cold seems to have frozen parts of your brain too. A corpsman comes through the hold, checking on the wounded. He stops at your bunk, looks at your feet. You haven't taken your boots off since Hungnam, afraid of what you'll find inside, the corpsman insists. Gently, he helps you remove your boots, peeling off socks that are frozen to your feet. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of sweat, blood, and decay. Your feet are black and swollen, the skin cracked and weeping. You've lost at least 3 toes, maybe more. The corpsman's face is professionally neutral, but you can see the concern in his eyes. "You'll live," he says, which is corpsman speak for, "it could be worse." He bandages your feet, gives you some pills for the pain, moves on to the next casualty. You lie back on your bunk and stare at the ceiling. You'll live, but the silver version of you that walked into Chosin a month ago. That version is dead, frozen somewhere in the mountains of North Korea, buried under snow and memories you can't escape. Here's a quirky detail that captures the surreal nature of the aftermath. When the ships reached Japan, many Marines had to be carried off because they couldn't walk. Not because of wounds, but because their feet were so frostbitten they couldn't support their weight. Some men took their first steps in weeks on Japanese soil, only to collapse because their legs had forgotten how to work. Physical therapists had to teach grown men, combat veterans who'd just fought their way through hell, how to walk again. The Navy corpsmen and doctors work around the clock, performing triage, amputating frozen limbs, treating wounds that have gone untreated for days or weeks. The ship's infirmary is overwhelmed, so they set up additional medical stations throughout the vessel. Surgery is performed in makeshift operating rooms, men lying on tables while doctors saw through frozen tissue, trying to save what can be saved. The sound of bone saws becomes a constant background noise, along with the screams of the men who've run out of morphine. You talk to another Marine, a the guy from your company who lost his entire squad at Udam. He's missing 2 fingers and most of his left ear to frostbite, but he's alive. He tells you he doesn't remember much about the battle, just fragments. The cold, the gunfire, the faces of his buddies before they died. He says he keeps waiting to feel something, relief, sadness, anger, anything. But there's nothing, just emptiness. You tell him you understand, because you do. As the ship continues south, away from Korea, away from the cold, you allow yourself to think about what comes next. Home, eventually. Medical discharge, probably, given the state of your feet. A life trying to forget what you saw, what you did, what you survived. You wonder if it's possible to go back to normal after something like Chosin. You doubt it. Some experiences change you so fundamentally that there's no going back. You're not the person who enlisted. You're not even the person who landed at Incheon. You're someone new, forged in ice and blood, and you have no idea who that person is. The ship's mess serves hot food, real food, not frozen sea rations or mystery meat from a can. You try to eat, but your stomach has shrunk from weeks of short rations. You can only manage a few bites before you feel sick. Around you, other Marines are having the same problem. Bodies that adapted to starvation don't readjust quickly. Some men throw up from eating too much too fast. Others just pick at their food, unable to summon an appetite even though they're starving. Someone starts crying, just breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably. Nobody mocks him, nobody tells him to man up, they just let him cry because they understand. Everyone on this ship has earned the right to cry, to break down, to admit that what they went through was too much. The miracle of Chosin isn't that the Marines survived, it's that they're still sane, mostly. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but the dreams come immediately. You're back at Chosin, back in the cold, back in the mountains, surrounded by Chinese soldiers. You wake up gasping, covered in sweat despite the warmth of the ship. The Marine in the next bunk looks at you with understanding. Same, he says. Oh, meow. Just that one word. It's enough. You're not alone in this nightmare. That's something. January 1951. You're in a military hospital in Japan, and the reality of what Chosin cost you is becoming clear. The doctors have amputated 4 of your toes, part of your left foot, and 2 fingers on your right hand. You're one of thousands of Marines going through the same thing, lying in hospital beds while surgeons try to salvage what the cold didn't destroy. The hospital is full of men missing pieces of themselves, physical and otherwise. The physical rehabilitation is brutal. You have to learn to walk again, to balance without toes, to grip things with a hand that's missing fingers. Physical therapists push you through exercises that hurt worse than getting shot. Every step is agony as damaged nerves protest. But you push through because the alternative is giving up, and if you survive Chosin, you're not the type who gives up. Other Marines have it worse. You see men who've lost entire feet, legs, hands. One guy from the 7th Marines lost both feet to frostbite. He's learning to use prosthetics, metal and leather contraptions that barely work. He jokes that at least he'll never get cold feet again. Nobody laughs, but everyone appreciates the effort. Humour is how you cope when reality is too painful to face directly. Here's a fact that illustrates the long-term cost of Chosin. Studies conducted decades later found that veterans of the battle suffered from PTSD at rates significantly higher than veterans of other Korean War battles. The combination of extreme cold, constant combat, and the psychological stress of being surrounded created trauma that lasted lifetimes. Many veterans reported nightmares about the cold, about Chinese attacks, about watching their friends die. The battle ended in December 1950, but for survivors, it never really ended. The psychiatric casualties are harder to quantify than the physical ones. Men who seem fine physically, but who can't sleep, can't eat, can't function. The military calls it combat fatigue or battle stress. Later generations will call it PTSD. Whatever the name, it's real, and it's devastating. Some men break down completely catatonic or violent or simply unable to cope with being alive. The hospital has a psychiatric ward that's as full as the surgical wards. You talk to a psychiatrist, a Navy doctor who asks you questions about what you experienced. You try to explain what it was like, the cold that hurt worse than bullets, the constant fear, the exhaustion so profound you couldn't think straight. He nods, takes notes, prescribes some pills that might help you sleep. You don't tell him about the dreams, about waking up convinced you're still at Chosin, about the panic attacks when it gets too cold. Some things are too personal to share, even with a doctor. The Marine Corps is already spinning Chosin into a victory, calling it a fighting withdrawal and praising the division's heroism. And it's true, what the Marines accomplished was remarkable. Surrounded, outnumbered, fighting in impossible conditions, they not only survived but inflicted massive casualties on the enemy and brought out all their equipment and most of their wounded. By any objective measure, it was an extraordinary military achievement. But sitting in a hospital bed, missing toes and fingers, having nightmares every night, watching your buddies struggle with injuries that will never fully heal, victory feels like a hollow word. You survived, yes, but at what cost? The person you were before Chosin is gone, replaced by someone you barely recognise. Is that victory? You're not sure. A quirky detail that shows how the military tries to maintain normalcy. The hospital in Japan has a recreation room where ambulatory patients can play cards, read magazines, listen to music. It's meant to help with morale, to provide a sense of normalcy. But most of the Chosin veterans avoid it. The idea of playing cards or reading Life magazine feels a bit when your friends are dead and your feet are gone. You spend most of your time in your bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the days until you can go home. Letters arrive from home. Your mother writes that she's so proud of you, so relieved you're alive. She saw news reports about the Marines at Chosin, saw pictures of frostbitten men being evacuated. She was terrified you were dead. You write back, trying to reassure her, trying to sound like everything is fine. You don't mention the amputations, the nightmares, the emptiness that won't go away. She'll find out soon enough when you show up at home missing parts of yourself. Other letters aren't so fortunate. You see Marines receiving letters addressed to friends who didn't make it, mail that was sent before the families knew their sons were dead. Watching them read those letters, knowing the writer doesn't know yet that the recipient is gone, is heartbreaking. Some Marines keep the letters, planning to give them to the families when they get home. Others burn them, unable to bear the reminder of who was lost. The doctors tell you you'll be discharged soon, sent back to the States for continued treatment and then civilian life. The Marine Corps is done with you. You've given what you had to give, and now you're damaged goods. There's no bitterness in this assessment, just reality. The Corps needs whole Marines, not ones held together with surgery and willpower. You'll get a medical discharge, a small pension, and a pat on the back for your service. You think about what you'll do when you get home. The life you had planned before the war, college, maybe, or a job in your hometown seems impossible now. How do you go back to normal life after Chosin? How do you care about trivial things like what to have for dinner or what movie to see when you've watched men freeze to death and killed enemy soldiers at point-blank range? The gap between the person you were and the person you are now feels unbridgeable. A chaplain visits the ward offering comfort and spiritual guidance. He talks about God's plan, about how suffering has a meaning, about how you're all heroes. You listen politely but don't believe any of it. If there's a God, he wasn't at Chosin, or if he was too busy to notice 30,000 men fighting and dying in the cold. You don't say this to the chaplain. He means well, and some of the other Marines seem to find comfort in his words. But for you, religion died somewhere between Udamni and Hagaru-ri. The physical scars will heal, mostly. Your feet will adapt to missing toes, your hand will learn to function without 2 fingers, physical therapy will help with the balance and coordination issues. But the psychological scars, those are permanent. You'll carry Chosin with you for the rest of your life, in nightmares and flashbacks and moments of sudden panic when it gets too cold. The battle may have ended, but the war inside your head is just beginning. February 1951. You're on another ship, this one heading east across the Pacific toward home. The war in Korea continues, but without you. The 1st Marine Division has been rebuilt, new replacements filling the gaps left by Chosin, and they're back in the fight. But the division that fought at Chosin, the one you were part of, that division is gone, scattered across hospitals, discharged to civilian life, or buried in frozen Korean soil. The men who survived Chosin have started calling themselves the Frozen Chosin, a darkly humorous nickname that captures both the horror of what they endured and the pride of having survived it. You're not sure you like the name. It makes it sound like an adventure, a story to tell at parties. But it's better than being forgotten, better than having people not understand what you went through. News reports back home are calling Chosin one of the most epic battles in American military history. Newspapers compare it to Valley Forge, to the Alamo, to other legendary last stands. except you didn't make a last stand. You fought your way out, attacked in a different direction, as General Smith put it. The comparison to disasters bothers you. Chosin wasn't a disaster. It was a victory, albeit one that cost everything. Here's a historical fact that puts Chosin in context. The battle marked a turning point in the Korean War. Before Chosin, the UN forces were advancing north, planning to reunify Korea and eliminate communism on the peninsula. After Chosin, those plans were abandoned. The war became a stalemate, eventually settling into a grinding conflict along the 38th parallel that would last until 1953. In that sense, Chosin was a strategic Chinese victory, even though the Marines escaped. But from a tactical and operational standpoint, Chosin was a Marine Corps triumph. The 1st Marine Division was surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces in the worst possible terrain and weather conditions. By all rights, the division should have been destroyed. Instead, they fought their way out, inflicting massive casualties on the enemy, bringing out their wounded and dead, and maintaining unit cohesion throughout. Military historians would study Chosin for decades as an example of how to execute a fighting withdrawal. The role of leadership in the battle cannot be overstated. Major General Oliver P. Smith's cautious advance, his insistence on building up supply depots and defensive positions despite pressure from superiors to move faster, saved the division. His calm leadership during the battle, his refusal to panic when surrounded, his careful planning of the breakout, these were the difference between survival and annihilation. Smith became a legend in the Marine Corps, and rightfully so. Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller, commanding the 1st Marine Regiment, also became a Chosin legend. His aggressive defense of Koto-ri and Hagaru-ri, his refusal to give ground, his inspirational leadership under fire, all contributed to the division's survival. Puller's famous response to being surrounded, "They're on our right, they're on our left, they're in front of us, they're behind us, they can't get away this time," captured the Marine Corps ethos perfectly. Captain William Barber and Fox Company at Toktung Pass became the stuff of Marine Corps legend. Holding a critical position against overwhelming odds for 5 days, suffering over 60% casualties but never breaking, they embodied the spirit of the Corps. Barber received the Medal of Honor, as did several other Chosin veterans, but every Marine who fought there deserved recognition. Just surviving was heroic, a quirky detail that shows how Chosin changed military doctrine. After the battle, the Marine Corps completely revamped its cold weather training and equipment. New cold weather gear was developed, better insulated, more effective. Training programs were established to teach Marines how to fight in extreme conditions. The lessons learned at Chosin, bought with a frostbite and blood, would benefit future generations of Marines. It was small comfort to those who suffered, but at least their sacrifice meant something. As the ship nears San Francisco, you think about what you'll tell people about Chosin. How do you explain the cold that penetrated everything, that made every action an ordeal? How do you describe the Chinese attacks, waves of soldiers coming through the darkness, bugles and whistles, and the terrifying certainty that you might not survive the night? How do you convey the exhaustion, the fear, the camaraderie, the small moments of humanity in the midst of horror? You can't. Not really. People who weren't there will never fully understand. They'll see the newspaper photos, read the articles, hear the stories and think they know what Chosin was like. But they don't. They can't. Chosin exists in a space beyond words, beyond explanation. It has to be experienced to be understood, and experiencing it changes you forever. The ship docks in San Francisco to a hero's welcome. Crowds cheer, bands play, flags wave. It's overwhelming after the isolation of the hospital and the ship. People want to shake your hand, thank you for your service, hear your stories. You smile, nod, say the things they want to hear. But inside, you're still at Chosin, still cold, still fighting. Part of you will always be there. Years will pass, decades. The Korean War will be called the Forgotten War, overshadowed by World War II before it and Vietnam after it. But those who fought at Chosin will never forget. Annual reunions will be held, growing smaller each year as age takes what the Chinese and the cold couldn't. Books will be written, documentaries filmed, memorials erected. The story of the frozen Chosin will endure. And you'll build a life as best you can. You'll work, marry maybe, have kids, grow old. The nightmares will fade eventually, though they'll never disappear completely. The physical scars will remain. daily reminders of what you endured. You'll meet other chosen veterans occasionally, and you'll share that moment of recognition, that unspoken understanding of what you survived together. It won't make it better, but it will make it bearable. Chosen will define you, whether you want it to or not. People will introduce you as a chosen veteran, like it's your most important accomplishment. And maybe it is. Maybe surviving hell with your honor intact, maybe refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier, maybe that's worth something. Maybe that's worth everything. You stand on the deck of the ship watching America come into view, and you make yourself a promise. You'll live. Not just exist, but actually live. You'll honor the men who didn't make it by making your life count for something. You'll carry Chosen with you, but you won't let it destroy you. The Chinese couldn't kill you. The cold couldn't kill you. And the memories, as painful as they are, won't kill you either. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir is over. The Korean War will continue for 2 more years before ending in stalemate. But for you, the war ended in December 1950, in the frozen mountains of North Korea. Everything after is epilogue, the slow process of learning to be human again after experiencing something inhuman. The ship docks. You walk down the gangplank, missing toes making your gait unsteady, and step onto American soil for the first time in over a year. You're home. You survived. Against all odds, despite everything the enemy and the weather could throw at you, you're alive. That's the real victory of Chosen. Not the tactics, not the strategy, not the medals or the glory. Just survival, just being alive to see another day. And as you walk away from the ship toward whatever future awaits, you carry with you the memory of those who didn't make it. The frozen Chosen who stayed behind in Korea's frozen mountains. Their sacrifice, their courage, their determination to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. That's the true legacy of Chosin. You lived. They didn't. And you'll spend the rest of your life making sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Let's talk about hubris. Not the ancient Greek kind, where some hero thinks he can challenge the gods and gets turned into a tree or whatever. No, this is modern American hubris, where a 5-star general with an ego the size of Texas ignores intelligence reports, dismisses warnings, and nearly gets 30,000 men killed because he refuses to believe he might be wrong. Welcome to the mind of Douglas MacArthur in November 1950. You're not at Chosin anymore. You're in Tokyo in MacArthur's headquarters, watching the general who won World War II in the Pacific systematically ignore every sign that he's walking into a disaster. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car is full of Marines and the crash site is frozen Korean mountains. MacArthur in 1950 is 70 years old, a living legend, the man who accepted Japan's surrender, who rules occupied Japan like an emperor, who genuinely believes his own press releases. He's surrounded by yes men who never contradict him, who filter intelligence to tell him what he wants to hear. When reports come in about Chinese troops massing near the Korean border, MacArthur dismisses them. Chinese laundrymen, he calls them. Nothing to worry about. Here's a brutal fact. In the weeks before Chosin, American intelligence identified at least 12 Chinese divisions operating in North Korea. Captured. Chinese soldiers confirmed their units and objectives. Aerial reconnaissance spotted massive troop movements. Local civilians reported seeing thousands of Chinese soldiers. MacArthur ignored it all. He was so convinced the Chinese wouldn't intervene that he refused to even consider the possibility. The reasons for MacArthur's blindness were complex. Partly it was racism, the belief that Asian armies couldn't stand up to American firepower. Partly it was arrogance, the conviction that his strategic genius was infallible. Partly it was political ambition, the desire to end the war quickly with a total victory that would cement his legacy and maybe launch a presidential campaign. Whatever the reasons, the result was catastrophe. MacArthur's plan for the final offensive in November 1950 was strategically insane. He split his forces, sending the 8th Army up the western side of Korea and X-Corps up the eastern side, with a 50-mile gap of mountains between them. The two forces couldn't support each other. If one got into trouble, the other couldn't help. It was a recipe for disaster, and multiple officers told MacArthur exactly that. He ignored them. Major General Oliver P. Smith, commanding the 1st Marine Division, was particularly skeptical. He deliberately moved slowly, building supply depots and defensive positions along his route, preparing for the worst. MacArthur's Chief of Staff, Major General Edward Almond, repeatedly pressured Smith to move faster, to be more aggressive. Smith refused. That cautious approach, which MacArthur's staff criticised as timid, saved the division. When the Chinese attacked on November the 25th, 27th, MacArthur's entire strategy collapsed. The 8th Army was routed, driven south in chaos. X-Corps was surrounded and cut off. The gap between the two forces became a highway for Chinese troops pouring south. In less than a week, MacArthur went from promising his troops they'd be home by Christmas to desperately trying to avoid total defeat. A quirky detail that captures MacArthur's disconnect from reality. On November 24th, the day before the Chinese offensive, MacArthur flew to Korea to personally observe the final attack. He stood on the banks of the Yalu River, posed for photos, and declared the war essentially over. Chinese commanders watching from across the river must have been laughing. 3 days later, those same commanders were overrunning UN positions across North Korea. MacArthur's response to the disaster was to blame everyone but himself. He blamed the Chinese for entering the war. He blamed the Joint Chiefs of Staff for not giving him enough troops. He blamed President Truman for not letting him bomb Chinese bases in Manchuria. He blamed his subordinates for not executing his brilliant plan properly. What he didn't do was accept responsibility for ignoring intelligence, for splitting his forces, for pushing ahead despite overwhelming evidence that he was walking into a trap. The political fallout was immediate. MacArthur began making public statements contradicting administration policy, calling for expanding the war into China, threatening to use nuclear weapons. President Truman, who'd already been frustrated with MacArthur's insubordination, finally had enough. On April 11, 1951, Truman fired MacArthur, removing one of America's most famous generals in the middle of a war. The decision was controversial. MacArthur returned to the United States to a hero's welcome, gave a famous farewell address to Congress about old soldiers fading away, and for a while looked like he might challenge Truman for the presidency. But the more people learned about what had happened at Chosin and elsewhere in Korea, the more MacArthur's reputation suffered. History's judgment has not been kind to his Korean War leadership. For the Marines at Chosin, MacArthur's failure was personal. They were the ones who paid the price for his arrogance. They were the ones freezing and fighting and dying because their supreme commander couldn't admit he might be wrong. The battle became a case study in what happens when senior leadership loses touch with reality, when ego trumps intelligence, when political ambitions override military judgment. The lesson of MacArthur at Chosin is simple but profound. Competence at one level doesn't guarantee competence at another. MacArthur was a brilliant tactical commander in World War II, but at the strategic level in Korea, dealing with a completely different type of war, he failed catastrophically, and thousands of men suffered because of that failure. You think about this as you recover from Chosin, as you read the newspaper accounts of MacArthur's dismissal, as you realise that the nightmare you survived was preventable. If MacArthur had listened, if he'd taken the intelligence seriously, if he'd been willing to admit the Chinese might actually fight, if, but he didn't, and you paid the price. That's the reality of war. The generals make the plans, the soldiers pay in blood. Now let's flip the script. You're a Chinese soldier in the 9th Army Group, part of the force that attacked the Marines at Chosin. You're not American anymore. You're Chinese. And you've just been told you're going to North Korea to fight the Americans. You have no idea what you're getting into. Spoiler alert, you're not coming back. The Chinese Volunteer Army, as it was officially called, even though there was nothing voluntary about it, began moving into North Korea in October 1950. Over 300,000 troops, organised into multiple army groups, crossing the Yalu River under cover of darkness, hiding in the mountains during the day, preparing for a massive surprise attack. It was one of the largest secret troop movements in military history. You're part of the 9th Army Group, roughly 120,000 soldiers assigned to attack X-Corps in eastern North Korea. Your specific target, the 1st Marine Division near the Chosin Reservoir. Your commanders tell you the Subitia. Marines are demoralised, poorly equipped, ready to surrender. They tell you the Americans can't fight in the cold, that they'll break and run at the first attack. They tell you this will be easy. Here's what your commanders don't tell you. The Marines are considered the toughest troops in the American military. They're well armed, well supplied, and they absolutely will not break. Also, the temperature is minus 30 degrees. and you're wearing quilted cotton uniforms that provide almost no insulation, and you're not getting resupplied because American air power controls the skies. These seem like important details to mention, but your commanders are too busy planning their glorious victory to worry about logistics. The initial Chinese attacks on November the 27th, 28th are tactically successful. Your units surround the Marines, cut the roads, take the high ground. For a few days it looks like the commanders were right. The Americans are trapped. Victory seems certain. Except then the Marines start fighting back and everything goes wrong. Here's a fact that Chinese commanders didn't anticipate. The Marines brought massive firepower to Chosin: artillery, mortars, air support from carriers offshore, and individual Marines armed with automatic weapons and grenades. When Chinese troops attacked in waves, as they were trained to do, they ran into walls of fire that cut them down by the hundreds. Some Chinese companies lost 80 to 90% of their strength in single attacks. But the bigger killer isn't American firepower, it's the cold. You're wearing summer uniforms, basically, because that's all that was available when the 9th Army Group was suddenly ordered north. Your commanders assumed you'd win quickly, before winter really set in. They were wrong. At minus 30 degrees, your quilted uniform is useless. You have no cold weather gear, no insulated boots, no winter coats. You freeze while you march. You freeze while you wait in ambush positions. You freeze while you attack. And then you die. Chinese casualties from frostbite at Chosin exceed casualties from combat. Entire units become combat ineffective not because they were defeated in battle, but because too many soldiers lost fingers, toes or feet to frostbite. Some soldiers literally freeze to death in their positions, found days later still holding their weapons, frozen solid. The cold doesn't discriminate. It kills Chinese and Americans with equal enthusiasm, but the Chinese suffer more because they're less prepared. Supply problems compound the misery. American air power destroys Chinese supply lines, forcing soldiers to carry everything they need on their backs. Food runs out quickly. You're rationing frozen rice, sometimes eating snow to fill your stomach. Ammunition is scarce, forcing commanders to conserve bullets and rely on human wave attacks. Medical care is non-existent. Wounded soldiers are left behind because there's no way to evacuate them. It's medieval warfare with the modern weapons, a quirky detail that shows the desperation. Some Chinese soldiers were found carrying American rations they'd captured, but they didn't know how to open the cans. They tried breaking them open with rocks, eating the contents frozen. Some starved to death with food in their pockets because they couldn't access it. It's darkly absurd, tragic and ridiculous in equal measure. Despite everything, despite the cold and the casualties and the supply problems, the Chinese keep attacking. It's not courage exactly. It's more like fatalism. You attack because that's what you've been ordered to do. You keep fighting because retreating means being shot by your own officers. You climb over the bodies of your fallen comrades because that's the only way forward. It's not heroic. It's horrifying. But it's what happens. By early December, when the Marines break out and fight their way to Hungnam, the 9th Army Group is a shell of its former self. Of the roughly 20,000 soldiers who attack the Marines, over 40,000 are casualties. Many divisions are reduced to 20 or 30% strength. Some divisions are so badly damaged they have to be disbanded entirely. It takes months to rebuild the units, and they're never quite the same. Chinese commanders claim Chosin as a victory. They drove the Americans out of northeastern North Korea. They prevented the Marines from advancing to the Yalu River. They inflicted heavy casualties on UN forces. All of this is technically true, but tactically, Chosin is a disaster. The 9th Army Group set out to destroy the 1st Marine Division and failed. The Marines escaped with their equipment and most of their men. The Chinese paid a staggering price and achieved only a partial strategic objective. The long-term effects on the Chinese military are significant. Future operations are planned with much more attention to logistics, to cold weather preparation, to the limitations of human wave tactics against modern firepower. Chosin teaches the Chinese that American forces, particularly Marines, won't break easily. This knowledge influences Chinese strategy for the rest of the war, leading to more cautious, methodical approaches instead of bold encirclement attempts. For you, the Chinese soldier, Chosin is the end. Maybe you died in an attack cut down by machine gun fire. Maybe you froze to death in an ambush position, waiting for Marines who never came. Maybe you survived the battle but lost your feet to frostbite and spent the rest of your life as a cripple. Whatever happened, you paid the price for your commander's ambitions, just like the Americans did. Different uniforms, same tragedy. Fast forward to today. You're a Marine officer at Quantico studying Chosin Reservoir as part of your advanced training. The battle happened 75 years ago, but it's still being taught because the lessons are timeless. How to lead in impossible conditions, how to maintain unit cohesion under extreme stress, how to turn a potential disaster into a fighting withdrawal. Chosin is the textbook case study for all of it. The most obvious lesson from Chosin is about cold weather warfare. Before the battle, the US military had limited doctrine for fighting in extreme cold. Equipment wasn't designed for sub-zero temperatures. Training didn't emphasize cold weather survival. The assumption was that modern armies wouldn't fight major battles in Arctic conditions. Chosin proved that assumption dangerously wrong. After Chosin, the Marine Corps completely overhauled its cold weather program. New uniforms were designed, better insulated, more effective against wind and moisture. Boots were redesigned with multiple layers and better insulation. Sleeping bags were improved. Weapons were modified to function in extreme cold. An entire school was established in California's mountains to teach Marines how to fight in winter conditions. The lessons learned at Chosin, bought with frostbite and blood, became doctrine. But the more important lessons are about leadership and unit cohesion. Why did the Marines at Chosin succeed where other units failed? The answer isn't equipment or tactics, it's leadership. Major General Oliver P. Smith's calm, methodical command style. His refusal to panic when surrounded. His insistence on bringing out the wounded and dead. His careful planning of the breakout. These decisions, made under extreme pressure, defined the battle's outcome. At lower levels, leadership was equally critical. Captain William Barber at Toktung Pass, continuing to command even after being wounded. Colonel Louis Chesty Puller at Koto-ri, inspiring his men through sheer force of personality. Countless junior officers and NCOs who held their units together when everything was falling apart. Leadership at Chosin wasn't about grand strategy. It was about making sure your men didn't quit, didn't give up, kept fighting even when survival seemed impossible. Unit cohesion, the bonds between Marines, also proved critical. Units that had trained together, that knew and trusted each other, performed better under stress. When casualties mounted and units were mixed together, the experienced Marines helped the newer ones, maintaining effectiveness despite the chaos. The Marine Corps' emphasis on creating small, tight-knit units paid dividends at Chosin. Here's a scholarly debate that continues today. Was Chosin a victory or defeat? Strategically, the Chinese achieved their objective of driving UN forces out of northeastern North Korea. Tactically, the Marines achieved their objective of escaping the encirclement intact. So who won? The answer depends on how you define victory. The Chinese stopped the Marine advance. The Marines prevented their own destruction. Both sides paid a terrible price. Call it a draw, with both sides claiming victory for different reasons. The logistical lessons from Chosin are also significant. The Hagaru-ri airstrip, built under combat conditions and used to evacuate 4,500 casualties, demonstrated the full importance of airlift in modern warfare. The difficulties with vehicle maintenance in extreme cold led to new procedures and equipment. The challenges of supplying troops in mountainous terrain influenced future planning for similar operations. Chosin also influenced thinking about retreat, de-retreat and withdrawal. Before the battle, military doctrine treated retreat as failure, something to be avoided. Chosin demonstrated that a well-executed withdrawal could be a victory in itself. The ability to extricate forces from an impossible situation, to preserve combat power for future operations, became recognized as legitimate military achievement. Attacking in a different direction, as General Smith put it, entered military vocabulary. The role of air support at Chosin cannot be overstated. Marine Corsair pilots flying in impossible weather, providing close air support that saved ground units repeatedly. Navy transports flying into Hagaru-ri under fire to evacuate casualties. The integration of air and ground forces, refined at Chosin, became a model for future operations. The battle proved that air power could be decisive even in the most difficult terrain and weather. A quirky footnote: after Chosin, the Marine Corps adopted the Frozen Chosen, as an unofficial but proud nickname for Chosin veterans. Annual reunions were held for decades, growing smaller each year as age took what the Chinese and cold couldn't. The last major reunion was in 2010, the 60th anniversary, with only a few hundred survivors attending. By 2025, only a handful remain. but the story endures, passed down through Marine Corps lore, taught to new generations as an example of what Marines are capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. For military historians, Chosin remains endlessly fascinating. The intersection of leadership, logistics, tactics, weather, terrain, and human endurance creates a case study with layers of complexity. Books continue to be written, documentaries produced, academic papers published. The battle has been analysed from every conceivable angle, and scholars still find new insights. The psychological impact of Chosin on survivors has also been studied extensively. PTSD rates among Chosin veterans are significantly higher than among other Korean War veterans. The combination of extreme cold, constant combat, high casualties, and the stress of being surrounded created trauma that lasted decades. Many veterans never fully recovered, carrying Chosin with them for the rest of their lives. Today, Chosin Reservoir is in North Korea, inaccessible to Americans. The battlefields are frozen in time, literally and figuratively. The mountains still stand, the roads still wind through the passes, the reservoir still freezes every winter, but the men who fought there are almost all gone, leaving only their legacy, their lessons written in ice, their story of courage and survival against impossible odds. You close your textbook and think about those Marines, your predecessors who fought their way through hell 75 years ago. You wonder if you could do what they did. You hope you never have to find out. But if the time comes, if you're ever surrounded, outnumbered, freezing and fighting for your life, you'll remember Chosin. You'll remember that Marines don't quit. They attack in a different direction. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's what Chosin means. You're sitting in a military history class decades after Chosin, and the instructor is showing photos on a screen. Black and white images of Marines bundled in frozen gear, exhausted faces staring at the camera, snow-covered mountains stretching endlessly behind them. The instructor clicks to a photo of a man with a weathered face and steely eyes. "This," he says, "is Major General Oliver P. Smith. He saved the 1st Marine Division." And he's not wrong. Oliver P. Smith was 57 years old at Chosin, old for a combat commander, but that age brought wisdom that younger, more aggressive officers lacked. He'd fought in World War II, knew what modern combat looked like, understood logistics and supply lines and the 1,000 details that separate success from disaster. When MacArthur and Almond were pushing for speed, demanding the Marines advance faster, Smith deliberately moved slowly. He built supply depots, he stockpiled ammunition and food, he established defensive positions along his route. His superiors called it timid. Smith called it survival. Here's the thing about Smith that saved thousands of lives. He didn't trust the intelligence. When headquarters said there were no Chinese forces in the area, Smith looked at the mountains and thought, those are perfect ambush positions. When Almond insisted the Chinese were nothing but laundrymen, Smith ordered his units to dig in and prepare for major attacks. When the offensive began and everyone else was talking about being home by Christmas, Smith was quietly building an airstrip at Hagaru-ri. That airstrip, that single piece of foresight, evacuated 4,000 casualties and changed the entire outcome of the battle. When the Chinese attacked and surrounded the division, Smith didn't panic. While other commanders were screaming into radios and ordering immediate retreats, Smith sat in his command post at Hagaru-ri and calmly planned the breakout. He refused to leave the wounded behind. He refused to abandon equipment. He refused to call it a retreat. "Retreat hell," he supposedly said, though historians debate the exact words. "We're not retreating, we're just attacking in a different direction." It wasn't just clever wordplay, it was a mindset that kept the division from collapsing. Smith's leadership style was the opposite of MacArthur's theatrical grandstanding or Almond's aggressive pushing. He was methodical, careful, deliberate. He listened to his subordinate commanders. He adapted his plans based on changing circumstances. He prioritized his Marines' lives over glory or political objectives. In the hierarchy of leadership, Smith represented everything MacArthur wasn't: competent, humble, and effective. Then there's Colonel Lewis Chesty Puller commanding the 1st Marine Regiment, and if Smith was the brain of the Chosin operation, Puller was the heart. Chesty was already a legend before Chosin, the most decorated Marine in history, a man who'd fought in Haiti, Nicaragua, World War II, and now Korea. He was 52 years old, looked like he'd been carved from granite, and had a vocabulary consisting mainly of profanity and motivational shouting. Puller's leadership at Koto-ri and Hagaru-ri was classic Chesty. When Chinese forces attacked, He was on the front lines with his men, not hiding in a bunker. When supplies ran low, he made sure his Marines ate before he did. When casualties mounted, he walked among the wounded, talking to them, reassuring them, making sure they knew they weren't forgotten. His famous response to being surrounded, "They're on our right, they're on our left, and they're in front of us. They're behind us. They can't get away this time," wasn't just bravado, it was the Marine Corps ethos distilled into a single sentence. A quirky detail about Pula that captures his personality: when General Almond flew into Hagaru-ri and tried to pin Silver Stars on Marines, most of whom had done nothing to earn them, Pula's men famously threw the medals in the snow after Almond left. Pula reportedly approved. He had no time for cheap gestures or politicians playing soldier. He cared about his Marines, and everything else was secondary. Captain William Barber and Fox Company at Toktung Pass represent another level of heroism entirely. Barber was 30, a company commander responsible for about 240 Marines, and he was given orders to hold a mountain pass that controlled the road between Udumni and Hagaru-ri. The pass was critical. Lose it, and the Marines at Udumni were cut off completely. So Barber dug in his company on a frozen hillside and waited for the Chinese to come. They came in waves, night after night, for 5 consecutive nights. On the first night, Barber was wounded by a Chinese grenade, shrapnel tearing into his leg. The injury was serious enough to require evacuation, but Barber refused to leave. He had himself propped up where he could observe the entire perimeter, and continued commanding despite the pain. When someone suggested he go to the aid station, he told them to shut up and get back to their positions. For 5 days, Barber commanded from that position, leg useless, in agony, refusing morphine because it would cloud his judgment. Fox Company's casualties were catastrophic. Out of 240 men, they lost 26 killed and over 89 wounded, with dozens more suffering severe frostbite. By the time relief arrived, only 82 men were still able to fight. The rest were dead, wounded, or too badly frostbitten to continue. But they held the pass. For 5 days against overwhelming odds, they held that frozen hilltop, and, because they held it, 8,000 Marines at Udumne were able to escape. Here's a fact that shows the impact of Fox Company's stand. Military analysts later calculated that if Toktung Pass had fallen, the Marines at Udumne would have been completely cut off, with no escape route. The casualties would have been catastrophic, possibly resulting in the destruction of 2 entire regiments. Fox Company's defence, against 10-1 odds in -35-degree weather, changed the entire outcome of the battle. Barber received the Medal of Honor. So did several other members of Fox Company. But the real award was survival. Lieutenant Colonel Don Faith commanded Task Force Faith, the army unit east of the reservoir that was virtually annihilated. Faith's story is tragic because it represents everything that went wrong at Chosin when leadership failed. His task force was isolated, undersupplied, and facing overwhelming Chinese forces. Faith fought brilliantly, organising defences, coordinating attacks, trying desperately to hold his position. But the odds were impossible. When the order finally came to withdraw, Faith led the breakout personally, riding on the hood of a jeep directing fire, rallying his men. He was hit multiple times by the Chinese fire, but kept fighting, kept leading until a final burst of machine gun fire killed him. Out of 2,500 men in Task Force Faith, fewer than 1,000 escaped. Faith received the Medal of Honor posthumously. It was small comfort for the massacre his men endured. Then there are the pilots, Marine and Navy aviators who flew missions in weather that should have grounded all aircraft. They flew Corsairs off carrier decks pitching in 30-foot waves. They navigated through fog and ice clouds that froze their instruments. They made close air support runs so low they could see the faces of the Chinese soldiers they were attacking. Without them, the ground forces would have been overrun. One pilot, whose name has been lost to history, flew 47 combat missions during the Chosin campaign, more than any other pilot. He dropped napalm, strafed Chinese positions, and flew reconnaissance missions, all in impossible weather. When asked why he kept flying when conditions were so dangerous, he reportedly said, "The Marines on the ground don't get to take a day off. Neither do we." That was the attitude that saved lives. The Navy corpsmen, the medics attached to Marine units, performed miracles under impossible conditions. They treated wounded men with frozen medical supplies, performed surgery with numb fingers, saved lives when death seemed certain. Navy Corpsman William McLaughlin at Toktung Pass gave his gloves to a wounded Marine and treated casualties with hands that were freezing. He lost several fingers to frostbite but saved dozens of lives. He refused to stop working until someone physically forced him to the aid station. These are the heroes of Chosin, not the generals in heated offices making strategic decisions, though Smith deserves every bit of credit he received. The real heroes were the company commanders like Barber, the battalion commanders like Faith, the pilots flying in impossible conditions, the corpsmen treating wounded with frozen hands, and the thousands of individual Marines and soldiers who fought when surrender would have been easier. They're the ones who made the impossible possible. December 2025. You're standing at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Virginia, in the Chosin Reservoir exhibit. Around you are artifacts from the battle, frozen rifles, tattered uniforms, photos of young men who look 100 years old. There's a video playing on loop, interviews with survivors, now in their 90s if they were still alive, talking about what they endured. Their voices shake when they speak about the cold, about watching friends die, about the 5-day nightmare that changed their lives forever. The Chosen Few, that's what they call themselves. It's an organisation of chosen survivors, founded in 1985 to preserve the memory of the battle and support surviving veterans. At their peak, they had several thousand members. By 2025, only a handful remain. Time is doing what the Chinese in the cold couldn't, slowly eliminating the men who fought there. Soon there will be no more Chosin veterans, only the stories they left behind. The annual Chosin Few reunions were legendary events. Veterans would gather, many travelling thousands of miles, to see the men they fought beside 70 years earlier. They'd swap stories, laugh about things that weren't funny at the time, cry about friends who didn't make it. These weren't sad occasions despite the tears. They were celebrations of survival, of brotherhood, of having endured something that should have killed them but didn't. Here's a touching detail about those reunions. Veterans would sometimes bring photos of Marines who died at Chosin, setting them up on empty chairs. "So they're here too," one veteran explained. "The dead were never forgotten. Every year, someone would read the names of those who'd died since the last reunion. The list got longer each year as age claimed more survivors. But they kept meeting, kept remembering, kept honouring the fallen. The memorials to Chosin are scattered across America and Korea. There's one at Quantico, another at Paris Island, a third in California. Each one lists the names of Marines who died in the battle, hundreds of names carved in stone. Veterans would visit these memorials, running their fingers over the names of friends, remembering 18-year-old kids who never got to grow old. In South Korea, there's a memorial at the Jangjin Chosin Reservoir itself. It's in North Korea technically, inaccessible to Americans, but satellite photos show it's still there. A monument to a battle that happened 75 years ago, standing in a country where time seems to have stopped in 1953. South Korea maintains several memorials too, honouring the Marines who helped defend their country when it was on the brink of destruction. The problem with remembering Chosin is that it's hard to convey the reality of what happened there to people who weren't there. You can show photos of frozen landscapes. You can recite casualty statistics. You can explain the tactics and strategy, but you can't make people feel the cold, the fear, the exhaustion, the desperate determination to survive. Those experiences belong only to the men who lived them. Veterans struggled with this their entire lives. How do you explain Chosin to your kids, your grandkids, people who have never experienced anything worse than a broken down car or had a bad day at work? Some veterans didn't even try. They came home, buried the memories as deep as they could, and never spoke about it. Others talked freely, telling their stories to anyone who'd listen, driven by a need to make sure the battle wasn't forgotten. The Korean War itself is called the Forgotten War, squeezed between World War II and Vietnam in American memory. But those who fought at Chosin never forgot. For them it was the defining event of their lives. Everything before Chosin was preparation. Everything after was aftermath. The battle sat in the middle of their personal timelines like a mountain, impossible to ignore, casting shadows over everything else. A quirky tradition among Chosin veterans. Many of them would never complain about the cold again. It didn't matter if it was 20 below zero in Minnesota or freezing rain in Seattle. They'd just shrug and say, "This is nothing compared to Chosin." For them, cold had a new scale. Anything above 0 was warm. Anything that didn't threaten to kill you was pleasant. Chosin recalibrated their entire relationship with weather. The impact of Chosin on families was profound. Children grew up knowing that their father had survived something terrible, seeing the scars, the missing toes, the nightmares that woke him screaming in the middle of the night. Some veterans were good fathers despite their trauma. Others struggled, damaged by experiences they couldn't explain or escape. The battle affected multiple generations, rippling through families like shockwaves. Books have been written about Chosin, dozens of them. Personal memoirs by veterans, academic histories by scholars, military analyses by strategists. Each one approaches the battle from a different angle, trying to capture something that resists capture. The best ones don't try to explain Chosin, they just tell the stories, letting the events speak for themselves. Documentaries and films have tackled Chosin too, with varying degrees of success. The challenge is always the same. How do you recreate the cold, the fear, the chaos on screen? How do you show what it was like without either glorifying it into an action movie or making it so grim that audiences tune out? Most productions fail because they focus on the fighting and ignore the cold. The cold was the story as much as the combat. In 2010, the 60th anniversary of the battle, there was a major reunion of Chosin veterans. Hundreds attended, some in wheelchairs, some with oxygen tanks, all elderly but still recognisably Marines. They gathered, they remembered, they honoured their fallen comrades. It was probably the last large-scale Chosin reunion. By 2020, only a few hundred veterans remained alive. By 2035, you can count them on your fingers. The question now is how to remember Chosin when all the veterans are gone. How do you keep the memory alive when there's no one left who was there? The answer is stories. The testimonies recorded, the memoirs written, the histories preserved. As long as people keep telling the story of the frozen Chosin, as long as Marines study Chosin at Quantico, as long as the memorials stand, the battle won't be forgotten. But memory fades. The Korean War is already the forgotten war. Chosin, despite its drama and heroism, is known to fewer Americans each generation. In another 50 years, will anyone remember? Will school children learn about the battle, or will it be a footnote in history textbooks, a few paragraphs between World War II and Vietnam? That's the veterans' fear, that they endured hell and it won't matter, that their sacrifice will be forgotten. The truth is more complicated. Chosin will be remembered in the Marine Corps, where it's enshrined in institutional memory. Every Marine knows about Chosin, studies it, draws inspiration from it. The battle is part of what it means to be a Marine. As long as the Corps exists, Chosin will be remembered. Maybe that's enough. It's 2025, 70 years after the battle. You're not a Marine anymore. You're not even at Chosin. You're sitting wherever you are right now, reading or listening to this story, trying to understand what happened in those frozen Korean mountains in November and December 1950. And the question is, why does Chosin matter? Why tell this story decades later, when most of the participants are dead and the Korean War is ancient history? The easy answer is that Chosin matters because it was an extraordinary military achievement, a division surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces, fighting in impossible weather, not only survived but fought its way out with most of its equipment intact. That's remarkable by any standard. Military historians will study Chosin for centuries as an example of leadership, unit cohesion, and determination under the worst possible conditions. But that's not the real reason Chosin matters. The real reason is what the battle reveals about human beings at their extremes. What happens when you take people, ordinary people, and put them in a situation designed to kill them? When you make them choose between giving up and fighting on when fighting seems hopeless? Chosin is the answer. Most people, given the right leadership and the right unit cohesion, will choose to fight. They'll endure unimaginable hardship. They'll keep going when every rational calculation says they should quit. That's simultaneously inspiring and terrifying. Inspiring because it shows what humans are capable of when pushed to the limit. Terrifying because it shows the price of that capability. The veterans of Chosin paid for their survival with frostbite, wounds, trauma, nightmares that lasted decades. They did extraordinary things, yes, but at extraordinary cost. That's the part that often gets left out of the heroic narratives. The political and strategic lessons of Chosin are important too. The battle showed what happens when senior leadership ignores intelligence, when political objectives override military reality, when commanders are more concerned with their legacies than their soldiers' lives. MacArthur's failure at Chosin should be a required study for anyone in a position of command. Hubris kills, arrogance destroys, and the soldiers pay the price for the general's mistakes. Chosin also demonstrates the importance of preparation and logistics. Smith's careful advance, his stockpiling of supplies, his construction of the Hagaru-ri airstrip, all the things his superiors criticised as too slow and too cautious, these were what saved the division. In modern military operations, the tendency is always to move fast, to be aggressive, to seize the initiative. Chosin shows that sometimes slow and methodical wins, that preparation matters more than speed. The human cost of Chosin deserves emphasis because it's easy to look at the battle as a tactical study and forget the real people involved. Over 750 Marines and soldiers died in the fighting. Over 3,000 were wounded. Over 7,000 suffered frostbite severe enough to require medical treatment, with hundreds losing fingers, toes, hands or feet. That's over 11,000 casualties out of 30,000 men engaged, nearly half the force. Behind each of those numbers is a story. A 19-year-old Marine from Iowa who lost all his toes and spent his life walking with a limp. A 22-year-old soldier who survived the fighting but died from pneumonia a month later. A 25-year-old pilot who flew 40 missions and then crashed on his 41st. His body never recovered. These aren't statistics, they are people, with families who mourned them, futures that were stolen, potential that was wasted in frozen Korean mountains. The Chinese casualties were even worse. Over 40,000 men killed, wounded, or incapacitated by cold and frostbite. Entire divisions rendered combat ineffective. Thousands of soldiers who died not in battle, but from freezing to death in ambush positions or starving, because supply lines were destroyed. The Chinese achieved their strategic objective of driving UN forces out of northeastern North Korea, but the price was catastrophic. Here's the moral complexity. Both sides at Chosin were victims. The American Marines and soldiers were victims of their commanders' hubris and poor intelligence. The Chinese soldiers were victims of their commanders' callousness and inadequate preparation. Everyone was a victim of the cold, which killed without discrimination. The battle wasn't good versus evil. It was humans trying to kill each other in conditions that were trying to kill them all. What would the veterans of Chosin want people to remember? Based on their testimonies, their writings, their speeches at reunions, a few themes emerge. They want people to remember the men who didn't come back, the ones who froze to death or were killed in action and whose families received telegrams that destroyed their lives. They want people to know that war isn't glorious, it's cold and painful and terrifying, and anyone who tells you differently is lying or trying to recruit you. They want people to understand the importance of leadership. Good leaders like Smith and Barber saved lives. Bad leaders like MacArthur and Armand cost lives. The difference between competent command and incompetent command is measured in body bags. And they want people to remember that Marines don't quit. Even when surrounded, outnumbered, freezing and facing impossible odds, Marines don't quit. That's not propaganda. That's what happened at Chosin. The final lesson of Chosin might be the simplest. War is human tragedy on an industrial scale. All the strategy, all the tactics, all the heroism and sacrifice, it all adds up to young men dying far from home in places most people can't find on a map. The veterans who survived Chosin carried it with them forever. The cold never left their bones, the fear never quite went away. The memories of dead friends haunted them until they died. So why tell this story? Because forgetting is worse than remembering, even when remembering is painful, because the men who fought at Chosin deserve to be more than footnotes in history books. Because the lessons of leadership, preparation, and human endurance matter. And because 75 years later, in a world that seems to have learned nothing from past wars, we need to remember what war actually costs. The last Chosin veteran will die soon, maybe within the next few years. When that happens, the battle will shift from living memory to history. The transition is inevitable and sad. But the story remains. The frozen Chosin fought their way through hell and came out the other side, not unchanged, but alive. They earned the right to be remembered. This is their story. This is Chosin. You close your eyes and imagine that frozen reservoir, those snow-covered mountains, those desperate Marines fighting for their lives in minus 40-degree cold. You'll never fully understand what they went through. Nobody can who wasn't there, but you can remember them. You can honour their sacrifice, you can make sure their story doesn't disappear. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, November 27th to December 13th, 1950. The Frozen Chosin. The greatest fighting withdrawal in American military history. A nightmare written in ice and blood. And a testament to what human beings can endure when they refuse to give up. That's chosen. That's the final word. Now dim the lights one last time. Rest your eyes. Let the story settle into your mind. The Marines at Chosin earned their peace. Maybe you've earned yours too. The frozen mountains of Korea are far away now, separated by decades and distance. But the story endures. As long as someone remembers, the Frozen Chosin live on.